Chapter 207. This sense of familiarity came from Pangu's Dao body, not him. After all, this was the first time he had come to the Outer Realm's chaos, so there was a sense of familiarity there. What I want to cultivate is a Pangu's Dao body that belongs to me, not a Pangu's body that relies on Pangu's remaining aura. Otherwise, will the Dao that I attain be Pangu's Dao or my Dao? Those who learn from me will live, those who imitate me will die. If I attain the Dao with Pangu's Dao and Pangu reappears one day, I'm afraid that he can assimilate me with a single thought and turn me into his incarnation. If that's the case, wouldn't my cultivation be a gift to someone else? The changes in Pangu's Dao body made Feng Zichen feel an uncontrollable sense of fear. Could a body that was not under his control really be considered his own body? Feng Zichen, who had been excited about absorbing Pangu's aura, was now filled with endless regret. Wasn't he just looking for trouble? Originally, the aura of Pangu's Dao body, which had been derived from Zhouxing, was incomparably pure. It completely belonged to him, and he could use it to attain the Dao. However, he had taken an unnecessary step and absorbed Pangu's remaining aura. Although he had obtained some benefits, it also caused his Dao body to become impure. It was tainted with Pangu's aura and gradually transformed into Pangu's body. Fortunately, he had discovered it early. If he had directly attained the Dao without paying attention, his future would have been miserable. He would have always been influenced by Pangu and would not be able to change even if he wanted to. Even if Pangu reappeared in the future and was merciful and could not bear to refine him into an incarnation. However, his Dao was a branch of Pangu's Dao. It would spontaneously move closer to him and be influenced by him, causing him to gradually become his incarnation. This situation was completely spontaneous and irreversible. Pangu could not stop it. At this point, I'm not in a hurry to prove my Dao. I should first erase the Pangu's aura in my body. Sitting down cross-legged, Feng Zichen opened his mouth and sucked in all the chaotic energy in the surroundings into his body. He started to temper his body inch by inch in an attempt to obliterate Pangu's aura. However, Pangu's cultivation level had already reached an unimaginable level. Even the remnants of his aura contained great power. As a result, it was extremely strenuous for Feng Zichen to refine. Even after exhausting all of his strength and spending several years, he still couldn't refine even a trace of it. No, this method is too inefficient. By the time I finish refining Pangu's aura, the shaman cataclysm would be over. Realizing that this method was useless, Feng Zichen had a thought and began to visualize the 5 elements demonic gods in his sea of consciousness. In an instant, a 5-colored light bloomed from his body, and 5 phantoms of demonic gods appeared. Turn. Pointing at the 5 elements demonic gods, Feng Zichen activated his force of true spirit to push the 5 elements demonic gods, making them rotate according to the principle of the cycle of the 5 elements. Rumble. As the 5 elements rotated, fortune was born. As the 5 elements demonic gods rotated, a 5-colored millstone gradually formed. It attracted the power of the great path from the unseen world and crushed towards Feng Zichen. Intense pain. Unbearable pain. As the 5-colored millstone pressed down, Feng Zichen felt as if his body was being crushed. He was in so much pain that he couldn't help but cry out. However, the effect was also shocking. As the 5-colored millstone rotated, wisps of Pangu's aura flew out from his body and gathered into a ball, floating in the air. At the same time as the 5-colored millstone rotated, a large amount of chaotic energy was refined into his body, constantly strengthening his physical body. As time passed, Feng Zichen's physical body became stronger and stronger. He gradually adapted to the power of the 5-colored millstone and no longer felt pain. As for Pangu's aura in his body, it was almost wiped out. Furnace of heaven and earth, come out. The disappearance of Pangu's aura made Feng Zichen heave a sigh of relief. However, to be on the safe side, he decided to add fuel to the fire and continue refining. However, the furnace of heaven and earth belonged to the untainted land after all. It was inevitable that it was not acclimatized to the chaos. As soon as it appeared, it showed signs of collapsing. With a soft exclamation, Feng Zichen spat out a stream of chaotic energy, which turned into countless chaotic runes and imprinted on the furnace of heaven and earth, stabilizing it. At the same time, the five-colored millstone transformed into the phantoms of the five elements demonic gods again and imprinted on the furnace of heaven and earth, increasing its power. Then, the chaos bead and the tree of world appeared one after another in the chaos. Together, they attracted the chaotic energy in all directions and turned it into chaotic fire, burning towards the furnace of heaven and earth. Huff! Being in the furnace of heaven and earth, the intense pain came again. It was so painful that Feng Zichen could not even speak clearly. He could only make muffled noises. This time, he made up his mind and swore to completely remove Pangu's aura from his body. Therefore, every time the furnace of heaven and earth's power failed to work, he called out a mark of the chaos demonic gods and imprinted it on the furnace of heaven and earth. After an unknown period of time, the furnace of heaven and earth could no longer withstand the power of the chaos demonic gods. With a boom, it turned into countless fragments and disappeared. Feng Zichen also woke up because of this. At this moment, he was completely different from before. After this round of refinement, his previous born Taoism aptitude and Pangu's Taoism aptitude had merged perfectly. There was no longer any distinction between them. Now, he could be called the Pangu Zichen clan. Moreover, the Pangu's aura in his body had completely disappeared and would no longer affect him. After delaying for so long, it's time to affirm my Tao. After resolving the hidden dangers in his body, Feng Zichen finally began to affirm his Tao. At this moment, brilliant light bloomed on Feng Zichen's body, and the laws of the great Tao manifested. There were many strange phenomena. In the end, these strange phenomena all gathered in one place and turned into a purple star. It slowly rose from the top of his head and went straight to the origin of chaos. This was the Emperor's Star, which was also the Tao of the stars. It was formed by Feng Zichen's Taoist rhymes and was his current highest achievement. In the chaos, countless great Tao manifested and attacked the Emperor's Star, trying to shoot it down and not allow it to go to the origin of chaos. Blocking the Tao's tribulation? Feng Zichen was not surprised by this. There was a Tao's tribulation that blocked the Tao in the primitive world. Naturally, there was one in the chaos. However, most of the chaos demon gods were suppressed under Mount Buzhou by Pangu. How much strength could the corresponding great Tao exert now? Sinking his mind into the Emperor's Star, Feng Zichen controlled it and bombarded it with many great Taos one after another, verifying each other, extracting the essence, finding the flaws, and constantly polishing his own great Tao to make it more perfect. In this way, the Emperor's Star became stronger and more perfect. In the end, it broke through the blockade of many great Taos and came to the origin of chaos. As long as he imprinted the great Tao here, Daluo Jingxian would be successful. Now, most of the chaos demon gods were suppressed under Mount Buzhou by Pangu. The few remaining chaos demon gods were also working hard to restore their strength. No one came to stop Feng Zichen from affirming his Tao. Walking forward, he imprinted the Tao of the stars on the origin of chaos. Daluo Jingxian was successful. Chapter 208. In the chaos, there was no passage of time, no past, and no future. There was only the present. Therefore, in the chaos, proving one's Tao was eternal and unique. There was no need to shrink one's timeline like the primordial world and extend one's great Tao to the past and future. Only then could one reach the realm of eternal proof. In this way, as long as the chaos is not destroyed, I will not die. Seeing that his great Tao was completely imprinted on the origin of the chaos and was no longer separated from it, Feng Zichen's heart was filled with excitement. Similar to the primordial world, by imprinting one's great Tao on its origin, one could be with it. Even if one died accidentally, one could rely on the great Tao imprint left here to be resurrected. The primordial world might be destroyed one day. However, after witnessing the greatness of the chaos, Feng Zichen really could not imagine what kind of power could destroy it. Even Pangu did not have the ability to do so. This also meant that even if the primordial world was destroyed, he could still survive with the chaos behind him. However, the primordial world's method of proving one's Dao, Daoyuo Jingxian, is somewhat similar to the characteristics of the creatures of chaos. Retracting the timeline and turning the past and future into the present was clearly an imitation of the characteristics of the creatures of chaos that only existed in the present. Not only that, the general process of the primordial world's cultivation was to constantly move closer to the creatures of chaos and gradually possess their characteristics. That's true. The essence of cultivation is to explore the true meaning of the great Tao. And the chaos is the source of all things. The higher one's cultivation level, the closer one's essence is to the chaos so that they can better come into contact with the great Tao. In this way, I have reached the sky in one step. I directly proved my Tao in the chaos and received the baptism of the great Tao. I have some characteristics of the chaos demon god. Compared to Daoyuo Jingxian who proved his Tao in the primordial world, I have many more advantages. Thinking of this, Feng Zichen was a little excited. He was not sure about the other benefits for the time being. However, he could still sense the most obvious benefit. The moment he proved his Tao in the chaos, the future of the primordial world completely disappeared. In other words, when Feng Zichen returned to the primordial world, there would only be traces of his past and present in the river of time and space. The future would be empty and there would be no traces left. One had to know that in the primordial world, the most important thing to achieve a primordial chaos Tao fruit that was comparable to a saint was to transcend the river of spacetime. Only by severing one's past, present, and future and completely disappearing from the river of time and space could one achieve primordial chaos and attain the supreme Tao fruit. Of the three bodies, the past was constant, while the present moved with the world. It was not difficult to sever the two. Only the future was unfathomable and unknown, making him feel like he didn't know where to start. However, Feng Zichen's future had long disappeared in the river of spacetime. Severing the future was naturally incomparably difficult for others. However, to him, he could sever it with a single thought. If news of such benefits were to spread, it was unknown how many people would be envious. However, it's still too dangerous for desolate wilderness cultivators to head to the primordial chaos to verify their Tao. Thinking of the dangers of the primordial chaos, Feng Zichen could not help but feel a lingering fear. Although he did not encounter any danger this time and succeeded easily, he thought that it was extremely easy to prove his Tao in the primordial chaos. In fact, his success in proving his Tao this time was completely due to Pangu's strength. Even if he did not like Pangu's aura, Feng Zichen had to admit that if not for the aura of Pangu in the void of end that strengthened the power of Pangu's Tao body, he would probably have been devoured by the violent chaos qi as soon as he arrived in the primordial chaos. Sigh. This opportunity is really heaven-defying. It gives me an extremely unreal feeling as if I'm dreaming. Recalling what had happened recently, Feng Zichen vaguely felt that it was an illusion. These fortuitous encounters were linked to one another. It was as if there was a mastermind behind the scenes that was silently pushing everything forward, allowing him to continue moving forward. However, now that I've become the Daoyuo Jingxian, regardless of whether the mastermind is good or bad, it won't be so easy to plot against me. The current Feng Zichen could be said to be full of confidence. He was no longer as powerless as before. After all, he was already the Daoyuo Jingxian. In any era, he would be considered an expert and had the qualifications to play chess. After taking another look at the origin of chaos, Feng Zichen turned around and left. He rode the Emperor's Star and returned to his main body. Immediately, the power of the great Tao appeared in the chaos, forming a huge furnace that enveloped his body. With the chaos qi as the fire and the great Tao as the firewood, he refined his body. This was the baptism of the great Tao, the blessing that the great Tao gave to those who had achieved the Tao. After completing this step, Feng Zichen could be considered the true Daoyuo Jingxian. Being in the furnace of the great Tao, Feng Zichen only felt that everything about him was becoming stronger and sublimating. There was an immortal and indestructible Tao circulating, emitting an eternal and unique aura. Heaven and earth furnace, go! Seeing the runes on the great Tao furnace, Feng Zichen's heart stirred. He used the heaven and earth furnace and compared it one by one, constantly changing its structure and transforming it into a chaotic magical power. At the same time, he took out all of his spiritual treasures and accepted the baptism of the great Tao with him. Such an opportunity could only be encountered by chance. He must not miss it. Moreover, in the end, Feng Zichen used his magical powers one by one, verifying them with the great Tao around him, gradually changing their essence and increasing their power. In the chaos, there was no concept of time and space. It was as if only an instant had passed, but it was also as if the world had changed. Feng Zichen only felt an unparalleled power erupt from his body and spread out in all directions. Boom! The terrifying power suddenly erupted. First, it shattered the great Tao furnace into pieces. Then, it continued to spread out, setting off boundless waves and triggering a small chaotic tide. I am from the Pangu Zichen clan, and I am Daluo Jingxian today. I hope the great Tao can enlighten me. As if he was enlightened, Feng Zichen suddenly stood up and shouted. As soon as his voice fell, the great Tao immediately reacted. The chaos shook inexplicably, and golden flowers sprinkled down. The laws manifested and stretched for billions of miles. Immediately, 2 divine runes of the great Tao appeared between Feng Zichen's eyebrows. They were the 2 words, Zichen, containing inexplicable power. This was his identity certificate. The great Tao recognized his identity and specially bestowed it. From this moment on, Feng Zichen was a Khanate god-fiend born in the chaos. He was incomparably noble, and his status was second only to the chaos demon god. Compared to the Khanate god-fiends of the primordial world, except for the top few, they all surpassed him. Moreover, this was an identity recognized by the great Tao. No one could deny it. Suddenly, a Tao of one origin fell and evolved into 129,600 Khanate runes. They merged with the chaos energy and formed a rune seal. Chapter 209. This is... While Feng Zichen was puzzled, the talisman paused slightly and fell into his hand. In the next moment, a message appeared in his heart, allowing him to understand the origin of this treasure. The One Yuan Dao talisman was formed by the innate rune general outline and contained the Dao of innate rune evolution. It was an innate spiritual treasure born from the chaos and was of the highest quality. It had 41 innate divine restrictions. This was a gift from the great Tao to Feng Zichen after he became an innate god-fiend as a Tao protector. The chaos was different from the untainted land. In the untainted land, there was abundant innate spiritual qi and endless creation and life, which could breed a large number of innate life forms. In the chaos, there was chaos qi everywhere. They were violent and unpredictable, entangled with each other and stirred the chaos into a mess. It was full of danger and extremely difficult to breed life forms. As such, every life form born in the primal chaos was exceptionally rare. Favored by the great Tao, they were the treasures of the chaos. At the moment of their birth, they would be blessed by the great Tao. Although Feng Zichen was not an innate god-fiend born from the chaos, his identity was recognized by the great Tao and he could enjoy the same treatment. It's a pity that I'm not a chaos god-fiend. Otherwise, the Dharma treasure given by the great Tao would not be an innate spiritual treasure but a chaos spiritual treasure. After accepting the One Yuan Dao talisman, Feng Zichen was still not satisfied. Compared to the innate god-fiend, the chaos god-fiend was the true son of the great Tao. As soon as he was born, he had the strength of Daluo Jingxian and was accompanied by a chaos spiritual treasure. Most of the spiritual items born in the chaos were a level higher than those born in the untainted land. Therefore, the chaos spiritual treasure was a Dharma treasure comparable to an innate spiritual treasure. However, his identity as an innate god-fiend was given by the great Tao because of Pangu. It was simply wishful thinking to want to become a chaos god-fiend. The 3 pure ones formed by Pangu's primordial spirit and the 12 ancestral sorcerers formed by his essence blood were only innate divine beings. They were still far from becoming a chaos god-fiend. He was a lucky guy who accidentally got Pangu's aura and could become an innate god-fiend. It was impossible for him to go further. This item can be given to Xianxia so that he can establish the innate talisman Dao and occupy the position of the talisman ancestor. In the future, when the immortal Dao flourishes, he can also rely on this to become a venerable immortal. At the same time, I can use this treasure to exchange for the sea-calming divine pearl from Xianxia and upgrade it to the chaos bead. The appearance of the 1 yuan Dao talisman could be said to have solved Feng Zichen's urgent problem. Initially, he was still thinking about how to obtain the sea-calming divine pearl from Xianxia. The appearance of this treasure provided him with a good method. The sea-calming divine pearl was a gift from the Grandmaster of Heaven to Xianxia. If it disappeared from Xianxia's hands for no reason, it would inevitably arouse suspicion. Bartering was different. It was a completely reasonable method. Even if word got out, no one would think it was a problem. After all, it was not uncommon for friends to exchange numinous treasures in the primordial world. Moreover, the first origin Dao talisman recorded the general outline of the innate talisman Dao and was a natural treasure of the Dao of talismans. With Xianxia's ability, he could use this item to establish the talisman Dao lineage. In this way, Xianxia would be the future master of talisman Dao. When the talisman Dao developed in the future, he could at least obtain the quasi-saint Dao fruit and become a quasi-saint expert. A quasi-saint level clone could provide Feng Zichen with a lot of help and solve a lot of problems. Rumble. A group of stars appeared. They were dazzling and illuminated the chaos. Golden Dao lotuses appeared and took root in the chaos, slowly blooming. There was a peaceful aura emitted from the Dao lotuses, calming the violent chaos qi, making this place temporarily a safe place. This was the phenomenon of Feng Zichen's Dao attainment. Daluo Jingxian was the incarnation of the great Dao. Anyone who entered this realm would have a phenomenon appear. Congratulations! If such a phenomenon appeared in the primordial world, it would definitely alarm the entire world and attract the attention of countless mighty figures. However, this was the chaos outside the world. It was truly boundless. Although his Dao attainment phenomenon was vast, it was not even considered a wave in the entire chaos. But it could not alarm the chaos demon gods hidden somewhere in the chaos. So powerful! Trying to move his hands and feet, Feng Zichen found that his body was full of power. It seemed that he could fight Daluo Jingxian with just his body without using any Dharma power or divine powers. Taking out the Zichen sword, Feng Zichen directly slashed at his left arm. Clang! Suddenly, the sound of metal clashing was heard. Feng Zichen's left arm, which was holding the sword, was slightly numb from the impact. At the same time, there was a slight pain in his right arm. Yes, that's right. It was just a slight pain. He was not injured. So powerful! The strength of my body is probably not weaker than an inferior grade connate spiritual treasure. Touching his body, Feng Zichen's heart was full of excitement. The Zichen sword was now an acquired cardinal treasure. Its power was comparable to an connate spiritual treasure. Even if Feng Zichen did not use Dharma power, that sword slash could easily cut an acquired spiritual treasure. But this sword slash did not even leave a trace on his body. From this, it could be inferred that the strength of his body was far beyond an acquired spiritual treasure. It was close to an connate spiritual treasure. Using strength to attain the Dao is indeed the strongest Dao attainment method in the chaos. Daluo Jingxian's body is comparable to an connate spiritual treasure. Primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian's body is probably comparable to an connate cardinal treasure. Then Pangu's body is comparable to a connate cardinal treasure, or even stronger. Using his own situation as a basis, Feng Zichen inferred in his heart. He could not help but come to a conclusion that shocked him. Now, I am more and more certain that Pangu did not die. Instead, he is hiding or is hindered by something, causing him to be unable to appear. Pangu had the strongest body in history. Feng Zichen did not believe that there was anything in this world that could kill him. However, Pangu was still too far away from him. He was an existence that he could not touch or understand. Whether he still existed or not had little to do with him now, and it was not something that he should be concerned about. Right now, Feng Zichen had a more important thing to do. Promote Zichen's sword to an connate spiritual treasure. Zichen's sword had accumulated a lot of experience. Just now, it had been baptized by the Great Path, causing the Khanate Taoist rime on its body to become even stronger. It was only one step away from being promoted to incarnate spiritual treasure. Coincidentally, Feng Zichen still had a ball of Khanate wind origin left behind after the Chaos Bead devoured the Khanate spiritual treasure. It could help Zichen's sword complete the last step. Go. Feng Zichen flipped his hand and took out a green ball of light. He cast a divine ability and injected it into Zichen's sword. Before that, the purple imperial sword had already absorbed the Khanate origin of heaven and earth, the origin of water, and the origin of fire. Now, when the Khanate wind origin entered its body, the 4 Khanate great elements resonated and produced an inexplicable change. Chapter 210. The earth, fire, water, and wind surged on the Zichen sword. The power of the world was born as if it was going to create a new world. Boom! Amidst the shocking explosion, the violet imperial sword shattered. The sword shattered into countless pieces and was obliterated by the chaotic qi. Only the natural Dao mechanism remained, and it was tightly entangled with the 4 elements. Then, a new world was born. There were flashes of lightning and stars. All kinds of Dao principles appeared and strengthened the world. This was the Khanate origin that the Zichen sword had devoured. Now that it was at a critical moment, the Khanate origin appeared one by one and helped it evolve further. As the world became more complete, the laws of heaven and earth began to operate. Suddenly, the chaotic qi in the surroundings was absorbed and transformed into the purest Khanate origin. It merged with the laws of the world and gradually gave birth to a Khanate sword embryo. What a treasure! The sword embryo was covered with runes and Khanate Dao principles. It was obviously an extraordinary item. With a thought, Feng Zichen transferred all his understanding of the sword Dao into the sword embryo. This way, when the Zichen sword was born, it would become the sword Dao's Dao instrument and grow with the sword Dao. It would be the most powerful Dharma treasure of the sword Dao. Boom! The world evolved to its limit and suddenly shattered. The origin of the world began to shrink and enter the Khanate sword embryo. A dazzling sword ray flashed. The Zichen sword broke the sword embryo and reappeared in the world. In an instant, a terrifying sword qi swept in all directions and shredded the chaotic qi. The earth, fire, water, and wind appeared and formed the world again. The Zichen sword was born from heaven and earth and was nurtured by the origin of the world. It could be said that it had endless opportunities. The postnatal qi in its body turned into Khanate Dao principles and completely reverted from postnatal to Khanate. It was promoted to a superior grade Khanate spiritual treasure and contained 36 Khanate divine seals. Great! With this sword, I'm more confident of establishing the Khanate sword Dao. Feng Zichen couldn't help but exclaim excitedly as he took the Zichen sword and sensed the Dao principles on it. This was not a joke. Feng Zichen often used the Zichen sword to fight against his enemies, causing the Zichen sword to be inseparable from the way of the sword. His entire body was filled with the way of the sword. Now that the Zichen sword had turned into a Khanate spirit treasure, the wisp of sword Dao Qi had also transformed into a Khanate Qi Qi, allowing Feng Zichen to peek into part of the mysteries of the Khanate sword Dao. He also had some ideas on how to go against the Xianxia sword Dao. The primal chaos is really a land of treasures. I don't know when I'll be able to come here again. It was a coincidence that he was able to enter the great chaos this time. Otherwise, with the barrier of heaven and earth, one would not be able to leave the primordial wilderness before reaching the quasi-sage realm. It was unknown how long it would take for him to break through to the sage-to-be level. This was a rare opportunity, so Feng Zichen planned to cultivate here for a period of time, organize his gains, and solve some small problems at the same time. Come out. He pointed at the chaos bead and 2 rays of light flew out. They were 2 Khanate Dao embryos, the Yin-Yang Dao embryo and the tripartite Dao embryo. These 2 Dao embryos had been in the chaos bead for many years, but they had not come out. Feng Zichen could not help but feel a little anxious. Today, taking advantage of the special environment of the chaos, he planned to give birth to these 2 Khanate Dao embryos. Chaos Array Rise. Forming a Dao seal, Feng Zichen activated the Chaos Bead and set up the Chaos Array. Khanate Dao diagrams flew out one after another and overlapped with each other, forming a great Dao Divine diagram. It slowly spread out in the chaos and absorbed the chaos qi from all directions. Among these 10 Dao diagrams, after the first Yuan Dao diagram and the 5 Elements Dao diagram, the 6 Directions Dao diagram merged with the 6 Directions Divine Clock, completely turning from illusion to reality, causing the power of the Chaos Array to multiply. The 6 Directions Divine Clock was a supreme-grade Khanate spirit treasure that Feng Zichen had obtained from the primordial ruins. However, it had long been shattered, causing its grade to drop. After being nurtured by the Chaos Bead and the World Tree, it had barely recovered to the superior grade and could not be improved any further. However, that was enough. It was enough to be used to preside over the Chaos Array. Rumble. As the array operated, streams of Chaos Qi were refined and turned into the purest Khanate 2 Elements Qi and Khanate 6 Directions Qi. They poured into the 2 Elements Dao embryos and the 6 Directions Divine embryo endlessly, accelerating their evolution. Not only that, but in the other illusory Khanate Dao diagrams, there was also a corresponding Khanate Qi being born. It was constantly evolving, as if it was about to transform into a Dao embryo and nurture a Khanate spirit treasure. Noticing this scene, Feng Zichen was delighted. He used the Khanate 8 trigrams and silently calculated. Sighed. What a pity. After a while, Feng Zichen sighed. In his calculations, if the Chaos Array continued to operate, about 100 million years later, 5 superior-grade Khanate spirit treasures would be born, causing the Chaos Array to be completely perfected. However, how could Feng Zichen wait for 100 million years? This method was useless. Not to mention 100 million years, he did not even want to wait for 10,000 years. Tree of World Go. Feng Zichen used his magical power and moved the Tree of World to the center of the Chaos Array. He used the power of the world hanging down from its body to replace his own magic power to activate the Chaos Array. Suddenly, the Chaos Array erupted with all its strength. The Great Path Divine diagram expanded and absorbed more Chaos Qi. The refining power also increased. Every breath, a large amount of Chaos Qi was refined. As a result, the 2 Elements Dao embryos and the tripartite Dao embryos could not absorb so much Chaos Qi for a while. Swallow. Feng Zichen's heart stirred. The surplus Chaos Qi surged toward him, constantly baptizing his body. However, he did not enter cultivation. Instead, he took out the Hongmeng Daozhong. There was still a Khanate ferocious beast at the level of Daluo Jingxian in it that needed to be dealt with. Fellow Taoist Huanzun. Your death tribulation. It's here. Feng Zichen took back the shadow of Mount Buzhou and lifted the suppression power of the Hongmeng Daozhong. Where is this? What death tribulation? Huanzun suddenly came back to his senses. For a moment, he was still a little confused. When he heard Feng Zichen's shout, he could not help but have some doubts in his heart. But immediately he reacted. Here, it's the outer realm chaos. This is impossible. With the barrier of heaven and earth, how could you, a Daluo Jingxian, leave the untainted land and come to the outer realm chaos? The familiarity that originated from the bloodline made Huanzun recognize this place. In addition to being frightened, he shouted at Feng Zichen in disbelief. The chaos was the graveyard of Daluo Jingxian. If he accidentally fell into it, causing his true spirit to be unable to return to the untainted land, then even if he died tragically, he would not be able to resurrect in the untainted land. As such, Feng Zichen's purpose in bringing him here was self-evident. How could Huanzun not be afraid? How could he not be shocked? Fellow Taoist, you are a fiend god born from the essence and blood of the Chaos Demon God. And this is the birthplace of the Chaos Demon God. Who knows, you might run into them here? With a smile, Feng Zichen said to Huanzun. Chapter 211. Shut up. You little brat, you've gone too far. Today I'll fight you to the death. The chaos was so vast that the probability of encountering a chaos demon god in the chaos was even lower than encountering Pangu in the untainted land. It was simply impossible. Moreover, with the illusion god's current state, he wouldn't be able to last long in the chaos. A single tide of chaos would be enough to take his life. Either way, he would die. Therefore, the illusion god erupted and ignited his innate origin. With unparalleled power, he charged towards Feng Zichen. Taoist illusion god, innate beasts are history. You, a beast from ancient times, should have met your tribulation long ago. Today, I'll send you to meet your tribulation. With a laugh, Feng Zichen waved the Zichen sword. Brilliant sword light burst out, and the sun, moon, and stars appeared. They split into 3 lights, forming a boundless starry sky that enveloped the illusion god. This was the Trinity sword scripture, heavenly sword. In the starry sky, each star represented a great Tao, containing supreme sword qi. One after another, they bombarded the illusion god, constantly wearing down his power. The illusion god was already seriously injured, so how much innate origin could he have left? Not long after, his innate origin was burned out, and his power continued to decline. He was gradually unable to withstand the impact of the stars. I'm not willing. The illusion god roared unwillingly. His eyes were filled with despair, and he looked at Feng Zichen with hatred, as if he wanted to remember him in his heart. Finally, with a boom, the illusion god detonated the last of his origin, blowing up the heavenly sword and turning himself into ashes. Only a connate undying true spirit was left, wrapped in the worldly mirror, floating in the chaos. You want to resurrect after dying in the chaos? You're dreaming. Feng Zichen waved his hand and grabbed the illusion god's connate undying true spirit. The illusion god had exploded, and the will above the true spirit had also disappeared. It would take a long time for it to recover. Therefore, Feng Zichen was able to easily get him. Hongmeng Dao restriction, seal. He pointed at the Hongmeng Daozhong and Hongmeng energy fell. It turned into runes of the great Tao and cut off the connection between the illusion sovereign's true spirit and the outside world. Not giving him the opportunity to absorb any power, completely cutting off his path of resurrection through the true spirit. After that, Feng Zichen casually tossed the illusion sovereign's true spirit into the chaos, allowing it to drift forward aimlessly along with the chaos energy, gradually getting lost. In this way, if the illusion lord wants to revive, he can only rely on the imprint on the world's origin energy to nurture a new true spirit. However, this will take a long time. Let's wait until the illusion revered god reappears. I reckon that even the calamity of the journey to the west has passed. In fact, even Feng Zichen had no idea how long it would take to nurture a Daluo Jingxian innate true spirit. But he knew one thing. Since the creation of the world by Pangu, he had never heard of a Daluo Jingxian true spirit that had been destroyed returning from death. From this, it could be seen that it was not easy to rely on the world's origin energy to revive. The time needed was definitely unimaginably long. This mirror is extraordinary. The myriad phenomena of the mortal world enchant the mind and make people forget to return. The 5 turbid energies destroy the tranquility of people and destroy the fruit of Tao. This mirror can be both demonic and Buddhist. It's extremely strange. Playing with the red dust mirror, Feng Zichen fell into deep thought as he felt the qi of red dust and 5 turbid qi on it. This mirror reminded him of the demonic path and the Buddhist path of later generations. The function of this treasure overlapped with the philosophy of the 2 sections. If it fell into the hands of the 2 sects, it would definitely be another supreme treasure. That's not right. It's the will of heaven that this treasure fell into my hands. Suddenly, Feng Zichen thought of something that made him feel refreshed. He understood the significance of the mortal mirror to him. When it came to the myriad phenomena of the mortal world, it was inevitable that there would be joy, anger, sorrow, joy, love, hatred, and hatred. All the worlds of the mortal world were caused by the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Only the 7 emotions and 6 desires could perform the boundless mortal world. and Feng Zichen had established the incense divine path. Over the years, he had collected a lot of the 7 emotions and 6 desires. He really couldn't throw it away or use it, so he had always kept it in the chaos bead. This qi was so powerful that it would be a pity to throw it away. However, when this thing was used, it couldn't distinguish between friend and foe. When fighting with an enemy, he was afraid that he would hurt himself first before he could hurt the enemy. Therefore, before he found a way to activate this qi, Feng Zichen had no intention of using it, so he simply put it aside. Perhaps it was because he had become a Daluo Jingxian and his vision had improved. When he saw the mortal mirror today, Feng Zichen suddenly had an idea and thought of a wonderful idea. Why not fuse the qi of the 7 emotions and 6 desires with the mortal mirror? In this way, after the God-conferment tribulation, the incense divine path would prosper. He could use the mortal mirror to receive the qi of the 7 emotions and 6 desires contained in the incense of all living beings. Not only could this move allow Feng Zichen to activate the qi of the 7 emotions and 6 desires, but it could also greatly increase the power of the mortal mirror. It could also add a treasure to the incense divine path to suppress fate. It could be said to be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. No, the use of this treasure was not only that. The mortal world was the mortal world, and it was also the sea of suffering. If Buddhism were to prosper in the future, Feng Zichen could disguise himself and use the name of helping everyone out of the sea of suffering to join the Buddhist sect and become a Buddha. If the demon sect were to prosper, Feng Zichen could also transform into a supreme heart demon, control the 7 emotions and 6 desires, and play with people's hearts. With this, it would be more than enough to join the demon sect and become a giant demon. With so many backup plans all of a sudden, even with Feng Zichen's current state of mind, he couldn't help but be moved. Even if he couldn't use these identities now, he could still use them as aliases to cover for his main body and provide help. It was just like opening an alternate account in a game. It might not be used normally, but it could be of great use at critical moments. Moreover, how could relying on outsiders compare to relying on oneself? It seems that I have to find an opportunity to open more alternate accounts as aliases. Perhaps one day in the future, there would be his aliases among the major forces of the primordial world, rising to the top and becoming the ruler. At that time, he would be able to do whatever he wanted in the primordial world. Such a scene was very beautiful just thinking about it. At the same time, Feng Zichen believed that there would definitely be Daluo Jingxian who would do so. After all, unless it was a last resort or they had the confidence to win, a battle at the level of Daluo would not engage in a life-and-death battle. Most of the time, they were still scheming against each other. With tens of thousands of years as a unit, they were constantly setting up arrangements to either force their opponents into a desperate situation or lead them into a desperate situation. At this time, the benefits of having an alternate account were reflected. Often at critical moments, unexpected people would jump out and give the other party a fatal blow. A shocking reversal was completed. Chapter 212. If Feng Zichen could think of the benefits, the mighty figures of the primordial world would naturally not think of them. Perhaps there were many Daluo Jingxian in the primordial world who were secretly opened by the mighty figures. Feng Zichen took out the qi of 7 emotions and 6 desires and sent it into the mortal mirror. Then, he threw them aside and stopped paying attention to them. Both of them were rare treasures. It would take a lot of time to completely fuse them. Coincidentally, Feng Zichen could take this time to calm down and organize what he had obtained recently. Boom, boom. One day, 2 loud sounds suddenly came from the chaos, waking Feng Zichen up from his seclusion. He couldn't help but release his spiritual will to look around. He saw 2 connate numinous treasures overflowing with spiritual light in front of him. They were the yin-yang Dao embryo and the tripartite Dao embryo. Connate yin-yang lock. Connate tripartite diagram. After taking the 2 connate numinous treasures, Feng Zichen sized them up for a moment and couldn't help but reveal a satisfied expression. First, it was baptized by the great Tao and then nurtured by the chaos qi, causing the essence of the 2 to improve significantly. Once it was born, It was a superior-grade Khanate numinous treasure with 34 Khanate divine restrictions. It was much stronger than Zichen's sword. However, not long after, Feng Zichen obtained 24 sea-calming divine pearls from Xianxia. Zichen's sword and chaos bead would be able to advance. After the postnatal reversal of the Khanate, the potential of Zichen's sword increased. Its path of advancement could be said to be smooth. As long as there was enough Khanate origin, it would definitely not be a problem to advance to a supreme-grade Khanate numinous treasure. Perhaps, this was the reward given by the Great Tao to the first postnatal numinous treasure to reverse the Khanate. Rumble. With a wave of his hand, Feng Zichen sent the Khanate yin-yang lock and the Khanate tripartite diagram into the chaos array and fused with the corresponding Tao diagram. Immediately, the chaos array changed again. The Great Tao array diagram became clearer and clearer. The power of the Great Tao descended, producing laws and realm walls, causing the entire array to become more stable, as if it was about to turn into an independent small world. At the same time, all kinds of Khanate chi in the array boiled and transformed into Khanate divine light, sweeping across the surroundings. What was even more shocking was that behind the innate divine lights, one could faintly see the figures of innate fiend gods moving about as if they were about to cross through time and space to descend upon this place. Khanate God Fiend? That's as Khanate God Fiend's shadow of the God Fiend's Khanate God Fiend. This will suppress all Khanate attention. Feng Zichen saw its future through the vision of the chaos array, and he could not help but feel shocked. Divine Khanate divine gods divine divines. Billions of divine lights shot out at the same time. Even a golden immortal would fall. The Khanate God's divine be experts. But this was still not the chaos array's strongest state. When the Khanate 10 Tao diagrams were gathered and the Great Tao divine diagram was completely formed, it would attract the power of the Great Tao. The chaos array could probably compete with primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian. Only then could it be called a top array formation in the primordial world. Zhouxing array, 12 divine wraith array, and immortal slaying sword array were the three great array formations. The reason why they were ranked in the top 3 of the primordial world was because they had the power to fight against saints. This was also why the other Khanate arrays were inferior to them. In the primordial world, only the Khanate arrays that could fight against saints could be considered the strongest. As expected of an array formation born from the chaos. It's indeed powerful. When the array is completed, the 3 great array formations of the primordial world will become 4 great array formations. Feng Zichen was very confident in the power of the chaos array. How could the array formation that accompanied the chaos treasure be weak? The chaos array that he had set up now was only a simplified version of the original array. Its power had long been weakened layer by layer. Even so, the great primal chaos array was still so powerful. It was hard to imagine how powerful the original great primal chaos array was. According to the original structure of the chaos array, it should be a chaos treasure that complemented the 9 chaos spirit treasures. Once activated, it could summon the incarnation of the Great Tao and sweep through everything. However, Feng Zichen couldn't even gather 9 superior-grade Khanate spirit treasures, let alone 9 chaos spirit treasures. Facing the real chaos array, he could only think about it. He didn't even have extravagant hopes. I'm really looking forward to it. I wonder what kind of storm will the complete chaos array cause when it appears in the primordial world? With a sigh, Feng Zichen waved his hand at the chaos array and put away all the treasures. He turned around and walked towards the door of the end. Everything was over. It was time to go back. Staying in the chaos, I can't feel the passage of time at all. I don't know how much time has passed since I left the primordial world. In front of the door of the end, Feng Zichen couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He couldn't figure out how much time had passed in the primordial world. It could be just a moment, or it could be directly to the age of gods. In short, everything was possible. I hope my luck isn't too bad. After saying this as if he was praying, Feng Zichen took a step forward and activated the merit of creation in his sea of consciousness. Immediately, the aura of the Great Tao filled the air. A dense purple light bloomed from his forehead and shone on the door of the end, illuminating it. Feng Zichen relied on Pangu's aura to open the door of the end and leave the primordial world. However, in the chaos, he realized that Pangu's aura would affect his future, so he completely wiped it out, leaving nothing behind. In this way, without Pangu's aura, it wouldn't be so easy for Feng Zichen to open the door of the end again. However, this matter wasn't difficult for him. Without Pangu's aura, Feng Zichen still had the merit of creation. This item was a reward given to Pangu by the Great Tao. It was connected to his aura and had endless mysteries. It was even more useful than Pangu's aura. Opening the door of the end couldn't be easier. Sure enough, under the illumination of the merit of creation, the door of the end slowly opened a crack. Seeing this, Feng Zichen's figure swayed and returned to the primordial world through the crack of the door. 10,000 years? Fortunately, it's not too long. It's still within the acceptable range. It's not a big problem. From the aura he left behind, Feng Zichen deduced the time he left this time and couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. 10,000 years was not too long for the current primordial world. It wouldn't affect anything. Moreover, after calculating, he had stayed in the chaos for more than 100,000 years, let alone 10,000 years. The extra tens of thousands of years made up for the shortcoming of his cultivation time. It could be seen that his luck was not bad. However, after returning to the end, Feng Zichen no longer had the power to control everything. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Chapter 213. Sitting cross-legged, Feng Zichen calmed his mind and focused. He mobilized the power of the sword Tao in his body, intending to take advantage of this opportunity to condense the Khanate sword Tao in one go and lick the Khanate Tao for the primordial world. Oh right, there's another opportunity here. Without any warning, a memory suddenly appeared in Feng Zichen's mind, reminding him of the strange place he saw at the bottom of the void of end. He had planned to put this matter aside and investigate it after condensing the Khanate sword Tao. However, that memory kept echoing in his mind, causing him to be uneasy and unable to calm down to cultivate. At the same time, an inexplicable consciousness appeared and seemed to whisper in Feng Zichen's ear, urging him to head to the bottom of the void of end. This is Heavenly Tao revelation? With a thought, Feng Zichen understood the reason. Anyone with a great opportunity would be favored by the Heavenly Tao. Every time they arrived at a treasure land, they would be able to obtain a revelation from heaven and earth and obtain 1 or 2 treasures. As a result, they would not return empty-handed. It was somewhat similar to the situation he was currently encountering. I really didn't expect that the Heavenly Tao's revelation, the top treatment of the primordial world, would actually happen to me. However, why would there be treasures that are fated with me in the void of end? Frowning, Feng Zichen was puzzled. No one was allowed to approach the void of end. The great Tao was extinct and the creation did not exist. What treasures could be born? Moreover, it could be related to him. Let's go. Since the Heavenly Tao had given a revelation, it meant that there was no danger and it was a pure opportunity. At that moment, Feng Zichen did not condense the Khanate sword Tao. With a flash, he rushed towards the bottom of the void of end. Tsk. The void of end is indeed the garbage dump of the primordial world. There's really everything. On the way, Feng Zichen noticed the surroundings and felt a little uncomfortable. This place was filled with viscous liquid of various colors. It was constantly squirming and emitted waves of foul stench. Upon closer inspection, one could see many broken limbs floating in the void of end, constantly being dissolved by the sticky liquid. It was extremely disgusting. Suppressing the discomfort in his heart, Feng Zichen increased his speed and arrived at the bottom of the void of end in a flash. Why is this place so clean? This is beyond my expectations. At the bottom of the sinkhole, Feng Zichen looked at the empty void in front of him and could not help but be surprised. According to his estimation, after so many years of sedimentation, the environment at the bottom of the ultimate should be even worse than the environment above. However, when they arrived here, not to mention trash, even the final energy was nowhere to be seen. There must be something fishy going on. The situation here is so strange, it's better to be careful. Although the Heavenly Tao's revelation was not dangerous, this was the sinkhole. It could isolate the Heavenly Tao's perception. The Heavenly Tao's predictions might not be accurate here. Who knows what would happen if he walked down the path carelessly? With that thought in mind, Feng Zichen took out the Primal Chaos bead and released strands of Primal Chaos Qi to protect himself before he carefully walked down. Nothing happened. Is this place really that safe? After circling the bottom of the sinkhole, Feng Zichen did not sense any danger, nor did he see anything happen. I was wrong. There really isn't any danger here. But where's my opportunity? After walking around again, Feng Zichen confirmed that there was no danger here. It was empty everywhere, and it did not look like a primordial land at all. Of course, he did not discover the opportunity foretold by the Heavenly Tao. It's really strange. This place is empty. There's nothing here. Where did the opportunity come from? Could it be that the Heavenly Tao sensed wrongly? But how can the Heavenly Tao be wrong? After scanning the surroundings, Feng Zichen still did not find anything. He could not help but secretly guess. It shouldn't be. With doubts in his heart, Feng Zichen squatted down and knocked on the ground with the Primal Chaos bead. With this knock, a sudden change occurred. The entire ground began to collapse. Primal Chaos Qi surged up, revealing a huge space. I was wondering why I couldn't find it. So there's another level below. Feng Zichen smiled and entered the space below. He was clad in a robe made of natural virtues, with the primordial bell floating above his head. He held the chaos bead in his left hand and the purple imperial sword in his right. Anything related to primal chaos that could remain until today without being transformed by the primordial land was not simple. It was never too much to be careful. This is Chaos Fiend God. There's actually a Chaos Fiend God at the bottom of the ultimate. How is this possible? How did he survive Pangu's attack? After dispersing the surrounding Primal Chaos Qi and seeing the scene in front of him clearly, Feng Zichen could not help but take a few steps back in shock. It was a huge figure. It was big in concept, big in the Great Tao. It was boundless, and it was unknown how big it was. The aura of the Great Tao surged around it. It was surrounded by purple gas, and it looked noble. It sat quietly on the ground, emitting a powerful aura as if it could suppress all Taos. Its eyes were wide open, releasing a terrifying murderous intent. It was incomparably cold and intimidating. Feng Zichen looked into its eyes, which was why his mind was stirred and he could not help but step back. He, who had a lot of contact with Chaos Fiend gods, knew at first glance that it was a Chaos Fiend god. It was the strongest, noblest, and most perfect life known in the world. Phew! It's just a corpse. That gave me a fright. After a while, the Chaos Fiend god was still sitting on the ground, motionless. Feng Zichen was curious, so he walked forward and sized it up for a moment. Only then did he realize that although the Chaos Fiend god's aura was powerful, it had no signs of life. What was left here was just a corpse. There was a bloody hole in between its eyebrows. That was its fatal wound. At this time, there was still blood flowing out with divine light. It was very extraordinary. Under Daluo Jingxian, anyone who touched it would die. What a great creation! After confirming that the Chaos Fiend god had completely fallen, Feng Zichen was so excited that he almost jumped up. The Chaos Fiend god was the incarnation of the Great Tao. Their bodies were the appearances of the Great Tao. They were the images of the Great Tao in the world. A complete Chaos Fiend god's body was equivalent to a complete Great Tao. It could also be said that it was a primordial Chaos Tao fruit. As long as it was devoured and refined, one could master a connate Great Tao and become a primordial Chaos Daluo Jingxian. What a great fortune this was! There might not be a second one in the untainted land. Therefore, one could imagine how excited Feng Zichen was. Not to mention him, even if a sage came, he could not remain calm. With excitement, Feng Zichen came to the Chaos Fiend god and was about to devour it. However, as soon as he touched the Chaos Fiend god's body, he found that something was wrong. Chapter 214. In his perception, the charm of the great Tao on the Chaos Demon God's corpse had been completely obliterated, leaving no trace behind. He could not even comprehend the great Tao, let alone achieve Tao. It was simply wishful thinking. I knew it. There's no such good thing in the world. Although he had already guessed it, Feng Zichen was still a little disappointed after confirming it. It made sense. How heaven-defying must it be for someone to directly become the primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian? How could the heavenly Tao allow such a treasure to exist? It would have been destroyed long ago. However, the chaos demon god's entire body was a treasure. Even without the charm of the great Tao, his body was still extremely precious. The body of the chaos demon god was condensed from the chaos chi. It was innately powerful and was not weaker than a connate spirit treasure. After that, it had been polished by them for countless years. Its strength was definitely not weaker than a connate spirit treasure. There were many connate spirit treasures in the untainted land that were transformed from the remains of the chaos demon god. Now, a complete chaos demon god's body was placed in front of Feng Zichen. If he used it to refine treasures, he could easily refine them into connate spirit treasures. Hiss! Pangu is so ruthless. It's not enough to obliterate the origin and great Tao. He didn't even let go of the body. There was a supreme power surging from the glabella of the chaos demon god. It was constantly destroying his physical body. By now, his bones, meridians, and internal organs had been completely obliterated. At this moment, the target of this power was the chaos demon god's flesh. With the speed of this power, in a few million years, the chaos demon god's body would only be left with a piece of skin. As for the origin of this power, it was naturally left behind by Pangu. The remaining Tao charm in the glabella of the chaos demon god was all indicating this. Feng Zichen could come to the ultimate ruin because of Taoist Hongjun's scheme. Obviously, he knew the ultimate ruin very well. If the body of the chaos demon god was still in a perfect state, it would have been taken away by Taoist Hongjun long ago. Because of the pagoda, Taoist Hongjun wanted to reward Feng Zichen. However, he was surprised to find that he carried Pangu's destiny. He had the heavy responsibility of nurturing the world tree to support the world. As the real ruler of the untainted land, Hongjun Taoist was very concerned about the untainted land. Naturally, he understood the importance of the world tree to the untainted land. Therefore, he had personally taken action and sent Feng Zichen into the ultimate so that he could obtain the body of the chaos fiend god to nurture the world tree. The so-called revelation of the heavenly Tao was done by Taoist Hongjun. He was afraid that Feng Zichen would not be able to find the physical body of the chaos demon god. Unfortunately, although Feng Zichen felt that something was wrong, he couldn't figure out who was behind it. He could only console himself that this was all because of his heaven-defying luck. At the same time, Taoist Hongjun had no way of knowing what Feng Zichen had experienced in the chaos. His original intention was to let Feng Zichen obtain the body of the chaos fiend god to nurture the world tree. He didn't have much of a plan. Ever since Feng Zichen entered the ultimate, he no longer paid attention to it. How would he know that Feng Zichen's luck was really heaven-defying? With the help of Pangu's aura, he directly went to the chaos to prove his Tao. Taoist Hongjun didn't expect this. It could only be said that everything was a coincidence. It was Taoist Hongjun's casual actions that created a series of unexpected events and allowed Feng Zichen to obtain a supreme opportunity. Sigh. A good primordial chaos Tao fruit and a connate cardinal treasure embryo has now become a supreme-grade connate spirit treasure. How disappointing! Perhaps his expectations were too high previously. Now that a supreme-grade connate spirit treasure was in front of him, Feng Zichen couldn't arouse any interest. He was full of disappointment. The body of the chaos fiend god had been destroyed by the power left behind by Pangu. Its value had plummeted. At most, it could cultivate a magic treasure like the 4 great lotus thrones. It couldn't go any further. Now, a supreme-grade connate spirit treasure is not of much help to me. It's useless to keep it. I'd better give the body of the chaos fiend god to the world tree to devour. After all, the world tree is very important. Not only can it support the untainted land, But it's also where the vitality of the human clan lies. Feng Zichen didn't lack Khanate spirit treasures. He still had several Khanate spirit treasures in his hands, which were collecting dust. At present, giving the body of the Chaos Fiend God to the World Tree to devour was the best choice to maximize the benefits. With a thought, Feng Zichen took out the Chaos Bead and released the World Tree, allowing it to take root in the body of the Chaos Fiend God and absorb his power. Under normal circumstances, with the current strength of Feng Zichen and the World Tree, even if the Chaos Fiend God had died, they couldn't get close to him. Otherwise, the remaining aura of the Great Path of the Chaos Fiend God could kill them in an instant. Unfortunately, the Chaos Fiend God was killed by Pangu, and the remaining power of Pangu in his body caused all his power to be obliterated. That was why the World Tree was able to devour his body safely. Khanate Taoist connotation? As the World Tree kept devouring the body of the Chaos Fiend God, amazing changes took place on its body. The Khanate Taoist connotation was emitted, and endless runes were flying. The Khanate Taoist connotation appeared, creating something out of nothing and evolving continuously. It showed Feng Zichen the process of the birth of a Khanate Taoist connotation. Such a spectacle contained the deepest secrets of the Khanate Taoist connotation. It could only be seen in the era when the world was first opened and all Taoists were born. At this moment, the same scene appeared on the World Tree. Seeing such a scene that he had never seen before, Feng Zichen gradually fell into enlightenment. Ah, I understand now. So this is the foundation of the Khanate Taoist connotation. The Khanate Sword Taoist connotation has been formed. After this enlightenment, Feng Zichen completely understood the foundation of the Khanate Taoist connotation and the future of the Khanate Sword Taoist connotation. He took out the Zichen sword and kept waving it in the void, carving many Khanate Taoist inscriptions. They shone brightly and lit up the void around him. 3,000 years later, Feng Zichen finally stopped his actions. At this moment, the void was full of Khanate Taoist inscriptions. They were densely packed and innumerable. Moreover, these Khanate Taoist inscriptions were of different attributes. Some belonged to the Tao of Fire, some belonged to the Tao of Space, and some belonged to the Tao of Stars. There were all kinds of Taos. They shone brightly and were extremely extraordinary. Khanate Sword Taoist connotation, condense. Raising the Zichen sword, Feng Zichen slashed at the Khanate Taoist inscriptions in front of him. This slash contained all of his understanding of the Sword Taoist connotation. It was the sword of enlightenment, the sword of establishing Taoism, and the sword of going against the Khanate heaven. Suddenly, hundreds of millions of dazzling sword lights burst out. They carried his understanding of the Sword Taoist inscriptions and entangled with the Khanate Taoist inscriptions. They kept colliding and stirring up sparks of wisdom. Chapter 215. Bang, 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 bang. Some sword lights dimmed as they were destroyed by the Khanate runes. At the same time, some Khanate runes were destroyed by the sword lights. As the two collided, the sword lights and Khanate runes shattered one after another, causing the void to gradually become empty. Of course, not all of the sword lights and Khanate runes were destroyed in the collision. Among the billions of sword lights, there were always dozens of sword lights that became more and more powerful as they fought, destroying the Khanate runes one after another. As time passed, these dozens of sword lights became more and more powerful. Every time they rotated, they could destroy dozens of Khanate runes. Gradually, miraculous changes took place in their bodies. Khanate Taoist rhymes were born, evolving into an inexplicable power that transformed them into new Khanate runes. These newly born Khanate runes were surrounded by sword lights, sword intent, and sword chi. They were Khanate runes that belonged to the sword Tao. Feng Zichen's sword Tao understanding turned into sword lights that collided with the Khanate runes. Every time they collided, the sword lights would steal a trace of Khanate Tao from the Khanate runes. Even if the sword lights were no match for the Khanate runes and were shattered into pieces, the stolen Khanate Tao would not be destroyed. It would transfer to another sword light and continue to tangle with the Khanate runes. The destruction of countless sword lights created dozens of the most powerful sword lights. While destroying all the Khanate runes, They stole their Khanate Dao and transformed into Khanate runes that belonged to the Sword Dao. The battle between the Sword Lights and the Khanate runes lasted for 1,000 years before the Sword Lights won and ended. At this moment, there were 81 Khanate runes that belonged to the Sword Dao floating in front of Feng Zichen. They were the cornerstones of the Khanate Sword Dao. From the process of the birth of the Khanate Dao, Feng Zichen understood its structure and how to establish the Khanate Sword Dao. Every Khanate Dao was made up of a corresponding Khanate rune. It could be said that the Khanate runes were the cornerstones of everything. If the Khanate Sword Dao wanted to be born, it had to have its own Khanate runes. That was the reason for the previous scene. Pointing at the 81 innate runes, Feng Zichen's magic power surged out, causing them to rotate in an inexplicable trajectory, gradually forming the shape of a long sword. With a wave of his hand, Feng Zichen took the sword into his hand. He calmed his mind and began to recall everything he had experienced in the way of the sword. All kinds of thoughts surged in his mind, causing a powerful sword will to emerge from Feng Zichen's body. It was as if it was about to break out and cut off all shackles, opening a path for all beings to transcend. Innate Sword Dao Go! With a loud roar, Feng Zichen poured all of his sword intent into the long sword in his hand and slashed it forward. Suddenly, the aura of the great path surged, unfamiliar and powerful. This was an aura that had never appeared before in the great desolate Aeon. The moment it appeared, it swept through the entire sinkhole, setting off a massive nirvana tide. Rumble! Under Feng Zichen's sword, even the void of the sinkhole was collapsing, revealing a terrifying scene. It was a scene of doomsday. Buzz. A sword hum sounded. It was the long sword in Feng Zichen's hand that was trembling slightly, releasing excitement as if it was happy for its birth. This sword was the incarnation of the Khanate Sword Dao. Under that sword, the Khanate runes that belonged to the Sword Dao were connected to each other and constantly combined, evolving the power of the Great Dao and finally forming the Khanate Sword Dao. Suddenly, the long sword that was formed by the Sword Dao trembled violently in Feng Zichen's hand. At the same time, hazy thoughts entered his sea of consciousness, constantly urging him to leave the sinkhole. There's no hurry. When I leave the sinkhole, you can complete the last step and become a true Khanate Dao. Feng Zichen said as he gently stroked the sword of the Sword Dao and calmed it down. Although the Khanate Sword Dao had been formed, it had not verified with the primordial world, nor had it merged with the myriad Dao, nor had it obtained the recognition of the heavenly Dao. Therefore, it could not be considered to be truly perfected. It was still one step away. Only by obtaining the recognition of the heavenly Dao and embedding it in the origin of the world and becoming the cornerstone of the primordial world could it be completely perfected. However, this place was the sinkhole, isolated from all contact with the outside world. If the Khanate Sword Dao wanted to be perfected, he had to leave this place. Of course, it was also thanks to this place being the sinkhole that Feng Zichen was safe and sound. Otherwise, the moment he established the Khanate Sword Dao, the heavenly punishment would descend and test the Khanate Sword Dao. If he passed it, he would survive. If he failed, he would be destroyed. According to the judgment of the two sacred beasts, the black tortoise and white tiger, the power of the heavenly punishment was at least at the sage-to-be level. The chances of Feng Zichen passing it were slim. Daluo was a magical realm. It included the sage-to-be and Daluo Jingxian realms. The difference in strength between the Daluo Jingxian realms could be as great as the sky and earth. It was even greater than the gap between the Khanate and Tai Jingxian realms. Logically speaking, Feng Zichen and Donghuang Tai should be in the same realm. However, Donghuang Tai could crush Feng Zichen to death with just a thought. The gap between the Daluo and Daluo was obvious. It was precisely because the gap between the Daluo Jingxian realms was too great that the sage-to-be realm appeared. Those who were still cultivating the three flowers were Daluo Jingxian. Those who had begun to transcend the river of time and space were sage-to-be. Taoist Hongjun divided the realms in this way. With the strength of the Daluo Jingxian, he was no match for a sage-to-be unless he had a Khanate cardinal treasure. Feng Zichen had just attained the Daluo Jingxian realm. None of the three flowers had bloomed. Although he was not at the bottom, he was not far from it. How could he fight against the sage to be heavenly punishment? The sinkhole is really a treasure land for me. Thinking of the benefits he had obtained in the sinkhole, Feng Zichen sighed. He no longer despised the sinkhole for being the garbage dump of the primordial world. Although this place is filthy, it is also an important part of the cycle of the primordial world. It will definitely be of great use in the future. I have to think of a way to occupy this place. If the sinkhole did not expel the waste gas of the primordial world, who knew what the current primordial world would be like? Moreover, the sinkhole was the final land of the universe, the graveyard of all worlds. Perhaps nothing could be seen now, but in the future, when the primordial world developed to its peak, countless worlds would be born and destroyed every day. Then, there would be a large number of broken worlds gathered here, giving birth to great opportunities and great creations. However, nothing exists in the sinkhole. It will be a little troublesome to control this place. The best way to control the sinkhole was to use the sinkhole's origin to refine an innate god-fiend clone. However, in the sinkhole situation, there was no possibility of any life being born, not even its origin. After thinking for a moment, Feng Zichen flipped his hand and took out a white lotus seed. This was the seed of the world-cleansing white lotus. Chapter 216. The world-cleansing white lotus contained the Tao of world cleansing and could purify all the filthy qi in the world. The ultimate ruins was the largest gathering place of filthy qi in the primordial world. If he planted the lotus here, it might have unexpected effects. With that thought in mind, Feng Zichen waved his hand and threw the world-cleansing lotus seed into a sticky liquid. The liquid was black, sticky, and constantly squirming. It also emitted a foul smell and was extremely filthy, making one feel disgusted just by looking at it. The world-cleansing lotus seed was different. It was pure white and crystal clear. It emitted a milky white light, making it look noble and holy. It grew from mud but was not tainted. It cleansed the lotus but was not a demon. That was the best description of the world-cleansing white lotus at that moment. The world-cleansing lotus seed fell into the sticky liquid. Not only was it not tainted, but it also emitted a dazzling white light and absorbed all the liquid, turning it into nutrients for its own growth. In a short while, the world-cleansing lotus seed had absorbed all the sticky liquid. After absorbing the energy, the purifying lotus seed began to change as well. Crack! Along with the vigorous vitality, the world-cleansing lotus seed cracked open and grew roots. A tender shoot poked out, surrounded by divine light. As the tender shoot swayed, wisps of creation qi droplets fell down, forming a small milky white pool beside it. That was the creation's spiritual liquid, formed by highly condensed creation qi. That was the ability of the world-cleansing white lotus. It could purify all the filthy qi and turn it into the purest creation qi. It's working! Seeing that the world-cleansing white lotus was effective, Feng Zichen could not help but be overjoyed. Then he took out 23 more lotus seeds of the world-cleansing white lotus and scattered them in front of him. He did not lack the lotus seeds of the world-cleansing white lotus. On Penglai Island, there was a pond of world-cleansing white lotus growing and bearing many lotus seeds. Of course, the lotus seeds borne by the world-cleansing white lotus were naturally not as effective as the lotus seeds borne by the main body. Most of the lotus seeds could only be used as connate spiritual herbs and could not grow into connate spiritual treasures. Only the first 36 lotus seeds had connate Taoist rhymes and could grow into connate spiritual treasures. Moreover, the most powerful quintessence amongst them was only a mid-grade natural spirit treasure at its limit, and it was truly unable to be of great use. However, this item was not bad as a gift. Therefore, Feng Zichen took 24 lotus seeds and kept them with him. He was going to give them to the human prodigies when the time was right. Who would have thought that before this item was even given away, it would come in handy here? Instantly, world-cleansing white lotuses were born one after another in the void. There was a total of 24 lotuses that were noble and pure, and they emitted a gentle and warm divine light of creation. After that, The divine light of creation joined together and purified the filthy chi that enveloped it, turning it into creation chi. He had forcefully opened up a pure land in the dead land of the sinkhole. Like a ray of light in the dark night, these sparkling lands of creation filled with vitality were unusually conspicuous in the gloomy and deathly silent ultimate. As if sensing the abnormality here, the chi of destiny in the ultimate boiled and set off a huge tide that surged toward the world-cleansing white lotuses in an attempt to destroy them. Although the world-cleansing white lotuses were extraordinary, their power was still too insignificant compared to the power of the entire ultimate. They could not be compared at all. Under the attack of the nirvana tide, the divine light of creation shattered one after another, and the creation chi that had just been born was obliterated by the land of destiny. Even the world-cleansing white lotuses were shaken and would be destroyed at any time. Go, world tree! Without hesitation, Feng Zichen pointed at the world tree and guided the world origin from its body into the world-cleansing white lotuses to accelerate their growth. The physical body of the chaos demon god contained enormous power. Even if the world tree could not refine it completely, just a part of it was enough to transform it and give birth to world origin. Buzz! With the help of the world origin, the world-cleansing white lotuses trembled violently. They grew faster and taller, producing lotus leaves and flower buds. Finally, they bloomed into sixth-grade flowers. In an instant, 24 sixth-grade world-cleansing white lotuses shone together and emitted a fragrance. The divine light of creation shone brightly and carried mysterious runes, forming an illusory image of a 12th-grade world-cleansing white lotus in the air. A vast power descended and blocked the final land that was constantly surging over. It stabilized their swaying bodies and firmly rooted them in the ultimate. The divine light of creation gathered again and formed an even stronger creation space. However, after learning from the previous lesson, the space this time was extremely small and only had a radius of 10,000 miles. It was many times more stable than before. Not bad. Although this place is small, it is like a nail firmly nailed into the ultimate. It will lay a firm foundation for me to control the ultimate in the future. Looking at the creation space in front of him, Feng Zichen was overjoyed and said happily. As time passed, the power of the world-cleansing white lotuses would grow stronger and the range of the creation space would also expand. One day, it would grow to the point where it could affect the entire ultimate. Not only that, Feng Zichen also planned to find a time to transplant the pond of world-cleansing white lotuses from Penglai Island to the ultimate. At that time, hundreds of world-cleansing white lotuses would work together and the speed of purifying the ultimate would be greatly increased. Moreover, purifying the ultimate had other benefits. The filthy aura in the ultimate might be harmful to others and would not be willing to get close to it. However, it was the best tonic for the world-cleansing white lotuses. After absorbing it for a long time, it could improve their connate origins and obtain a chance to advance. The world-cleansing white lotuses also reduced the pressure on the ultimate and delayed the arrival of the universe's decline. The primordial universe was not unchanging. They had their own calamities as well. Beginning, prosperity, and decline. These three stages were a process that the development of the world had to go through. Now, the primordial world was at the beginning of its prosperity. Therefore, the laws of heaven and earth were abnormally active. Daluo Jingxian emerged endlessly and quasi-sage experts were not rare. However, as the world developed, it would inevitably enter a period of decline. At that time, the ultimate would erupt. The aura of the end would sweep through the entire world and bring about the apocalypse of the universe. The world-cleansing white lotuses purified the filthy aura, reduced the pressure on the ultimate, and delayed the arrival of the apocalypse of the universe. They would definitely be favored by the primordial world and have great benefits. Boom. Just as Feng Zichen was looking forward to the future, a change occurred in the ultimate. A vast power reward surrounded the creation space. The abnormality here finally attracted the attention of the ultimate's will. He looked over here. At that moment, Feng Zichen could not help but feel a little nervous. He, who had briefly become the master of the ultimate, knew how terrifying the ultimate's will was. If he wanted to destroy the world-cleansing white lotuses, even the 12th grade world-cleansing white lotuses would not be able to stop him, let alone these middle-grade Khanate numinous treasures in front of him. Chapter 217. However, the next action of the sinkholes was somewhat beyond Feng Zichen's expectations. In the void, the heaven and earth origin energy fell and surged into the world-cleansing white lotus. It enhanced their Khanate origin energy and improved their grade. They grew a 7th petal and turned into a 7th grade lotus platform. The heaven and earth origin energy that fell from the void was the origin energy of the sinkhole. After the sinkholes descended, not only did it not destroy the world-cleansing white lotus, it even consumed its own origin energy to help the world-cleansing white lotus grow. Feng Zichen could not help but feel puzzled by this unusual behavior. What's going on? Just as Feng Zichen was pondering, the world-cleansing white lotus grew another petal and became an 8th grade lotus platform. But even so, the sinkhole's origin energy still showed no signs of stopping. Impressive! Although he did not understand the current situation, it did not stop Feng Zichen from being happy. Seeing the world-cleansing white lotus grow stronger and stronger as its owner, how could he not be happy? After waiting for a few more years, the sinkholes finally stopped instilling origin energy and slowly faded. And at that moment, among the 24 world-cleansing white lotuses, 3 of them bloomed 9th grade flowers and advanced to superior grade Khanate numinous treasures. Especially the world-cleansing white lotus at the beginning, it had undergone a shocking change. Apart from the power of world cleansing, there was also the aura of the sinkhole surging in its body. Its color had also become half black and half white, looking extremely strange. If one were to take a closer look, they would discover that the 10th petal had already appeared on its body. It would not take long for it to grow out. If this continues, this world-cleansing white lotus will probably become the sinkhole black lotus. Probing the body of the world-cleansing white lotus with spiritual force, Feng Zichen discovered that its Khanate origin energy had already transformed into the Tao of the sinkhole. If there came a day when this lotus could grow 12 petals and become a 12th grade lotus platform, it would advance to a supreme grade Khanate numinous treasure. Its purification Tao would completely transform into the Tao of the sinkhole and become the sinkhole's supreme treasure, the 12th grade sinkhole black lotus. Rumble! The power of the world-cleansing white lotus increased greatly, causing the creation space to expand. In the blink of an eye, it expanded from a radius of 10,000 li to a radius of 1,000,000 li. Furthermore, the creation space had obtained the approval of the Ultimate's will and had completely merged with it. It had become an indispensable part of the Ultimate and would no longer be attacked by the final Qi. As the creation space calmed down, a feeling of completeness suddenly came from within the Ultimate. It was as if the Ultimate had not been complete before. Then, a feeling of joy spread through the void. Clearly, the sinkhole was very excited. Perfect! Could it be the sinkhole from before was not complete? The sense of completeness that came from the sinkhole piqued Feng Zichen's curiosity. As a magical place created by Pangu's body, it was actually not perfect. This was a bit strange. Taking advantage of the turmoil in the sinkhole, Feng Zichen activated the Tao of the stars and created the river of time and space. He traced the past and future and explored the secrets of the sinkhole. After a moment, Feng Zichen retracted his spirit consciousness. He was already clear about the changes in the sinkhole. As the saying goes, things will move in the opposite direction when they reach an extreme. Since the creation of the primordial world, the sinkhole had accumulated an unknown amount of foul qi and should have long given birth to a creation opportunity. However, the Chaos Fian Celestial's corpse fell here and forcefully shattered the creation opportunity of the sinkhole, causing a flaw to appear in the sinkhole. Even after countless years, it could not be repaired and could not be perfected. The appearance of the creation space allowed the sinkhole's will to see an opportunity to make up for the flaw. That was why it took the initiative to help the world-cleansing white lotus to create the creation space and return it to perfection. At that moment, the creation space had changed drastically, turning into a gigantic lake with milky white creation liquid flowing inside. In the center of the lake grew 24 world-cleansing white lotuses. As the lotuses swayed, they emitted a fragrance and absorbed the power of the sinkhole from all directions, converting it into creation's spirit liquid that flowed into the lake and strengthened it continuously. Is a Khanate god fiend about to be born in the sinkhole? In the center of the lake, there were two weak life auras that attracted Feng Zichen's attention. Walking forward, Feng Zichen saw that two illusory Khanate Dao embryos had suddenly appeared on the half-black and half-white world-cleansing white lotus. One was black and one was white, displaying the Dao of the sinkhole. The black Khanate Dao embryo had the aura of finality surging around it. Clearly, it had inherited the characteristics of the sinkhole's finality. The white Khanate Dao embryo was surrounded by the power of creation. It was pure and flawless. Creation that was born from destruction symbolized hope and was the embodiment of the other side of the sinkhole. It's really the will of the heavens. I was still thinking about how to control the sinkhole, and now the opportunity has come. Looking at the Khanate Dao embryo, Feng Zichen's mind stirred. A wisp of great Dao imprint flew out and fused into the black Khanate Dao embryo, wanting to refine it into an avatar. Now, he was an expert on the level of Daluo Jingxian. Refining an avatar was naturally not as troublesome as before. A wisp of great Dao imprint was enough. The Khanate Dao embryo had yet to be completely formed. There was only a ball of Khanate origin inside. It had not even developed a consciousness. Facing Feng Zichen's refinement, how could it resist? It was easily refined by him and became one of his avatars. Looking at the white Khanate Dao embryo, Feng Zichen dismissed the plan of refining it into an avatar. This was because refining one Khanate Dao embryo was already the limit of the sinkhole's will. If he continued to refine a second one, the sinkhole's will would explode on the spot and fight him to the death. Forget it. One Khanate Dao embryo is enough. Leave a way out when doing things so that we can meet in the future. I will have to deal with the sinkhole in the future. If I offend him, I will be in big trouble. If not for the fact that he was the owner of the White Lotus of Purification, Feng Zichen believed that the sinkhole's will would have destroyed him the moment he refined the Khanate Dao embryo. Now, the sinkhole's will was afraid of breaking the vases. He was afraid that Feng Zichen would take away the White Lotus of Purification and cause him to fall from a perfect state. Therefore, when Feng Zichen refined the black Khanate Dao embryo, he turned a blind eye and treated it as a reward for Feng Zichen. However, if Feng Zichen went overboard and touched the bottom line of the sinkhole's will, he would definitely make Feng Zichen pay the price. Now that the sinkhole's origin is greatly damaged, who knows how long it will take for them to be born with these two Khanate Dao embryos. I have to help them. With that thought in mind, Feng Zichen used his mystical abilities and continued to trigger the world's origin from the world tree to nurture the Khanate Dao embryo. Of course, in order to express his goodwill to the sinkhole, Feng Zichen treated them equally and let the two Khanate Dao embryos enjoy the same treatment. He did not show any favoritism. After doing all that, Feng Zichen returned to the world tree. As he waited for the world tree to finish devouring the Chaos Fiend Celestial's body, he honed his Khanate Sword Dao. After leaving the sinkhole, the Khanate Sword Dao would appear in the primordial world for the first time. He could not lose the limelight. Chapter 218. Clang. The sound of a heavy object hitting the ground woke Feng Zichen up from his cultivation. What's this? Opening his eyes, Feng Zichen saw a small piece of jade on the ground below the Chaos Fiend God. Obviously, this piece of jade had fallen from him. Although this piece of jade was called a small piece, it was actually not small. It was about 100,000 feet tall. It was just that the Chaos Fiend God next to it was too huge, which made it look extremely small. This jade was purple, and there was a faint purple flow, revealing a noble aura. There were also thousands of Daos surrounding it, as if it was the sect of the great Dao and the master of all Daos, which could suppress the universe, the past, and the future. It's Pangu's aura. From this piece of purple jade, Feng Zichen felt a familiar aura. It was Pangu's aura. Then he seemed to have thought of something. He couldn't help but shake his body and transform into 1,000,000 feet high to take a closer look at the purple jade. Sure enough, after his body grew bigger, Feng Zichen looked at the purple jade again. He then had a panoramic view of its size and made a different discovery. The more he looked at the shape of the purple jade, the more it looked like a phalanx. When he compared it with his own phalanx, he found that there were indeed similarities. In this way, Feng Zichen was sure. This purple jade was a phalanx of Pangu. One had to know that Feng Zichen's physical body was originally modeled after Pangu's Taoist body. Its internal structure and shape were roughly similar to Pangu's Taoist body, only the details were different. This purple jade was more than 80% similar to Feng Zichen's phalanx. Moreover, this jade contained the pure aura of Pangu. Its origin was self-evident. No wonder this chaos fiend god died so thoroughly that even his physical body was almost destroyed. It turns out that between his eyebrows, there is a section of Pangu's finger bone that is constantly releasing power and obliterating everything about him. At first, Feng Zichen was still puzzled. Although Pangu was strong, the chaos fiend god was not weak either. How could Pangu's remaining power maintain such a powerful force and constantly destroy the body of the chaos demon god after so many years? Now, after seeing Pangu's finger bone, Feng Zichen understood everything. With this item, Pangu's power would be endless. What a great fortune! What a great opportunity! After the shock, Feng Zichen's heart was filled with excitement. In the untainted land, anything that had something to do with Pangu was a good thing. They could be favored by the heavens and earth and had great luck. What's more, this was Pangu's finger bone. If this item was not used to kill the chaos fiend god but fell into the untainted land, it would most likely give birth to intelligence and turn into a Khanate fiend god, becoming a powerful expert in the untainted land. However, that was when Pangu's finger bone was in its peak state. Now, it did not have this ability. After fighting with the Chaos Fiend God for so many years, the body of the Chaos Fiend God was almost destroyed. Pangu's finger bone was also consumed. Its origin had long been exhausted, and its charm of the great Tao was almost gone. Only the hard bone body was still the same. Still, if Pangu's finger bone was still in its peak state, it would have been taken by Hongjun long ago. It had been taken away by Hongjun Taoist many years ago. How could it be left for Feng Zichen? However, as long as Pangu's finger bone was not completely destroyed, it was still a treasure of the untainted land and would be of great use to Feng Zichen. Pangu's finger bone was one of Pangu's body parts. It naturally occupied a portion of the Khanate luck of the untainted land. Taoist Hongjun might not care about this bit of luck, but Feng Zichen did. As long as this item was enshrined in the ancestral temple of the human race, it would be blessed by the Khanate luck. It could also suppress the luck of the human race and protect the human race from extinguishing. It could also be favored by heaven and earth and give birth to more geniuses. Therefore, Pangu's finger bone had a great symbolic meaning in addition to its practical significance. First, he released the aura of Pangu's Tao body with all his strength. Then, he activated the Khanate merit in his body. Feng Zichen tried to make his aura as close as possible to Pangu. Only then did he walk forward and grab Pangu's finger bone. Perhaps it was the aura of Pangu on Feng Zichen's body that worked. Pangu's finger bone was held in his hand without any resistance. Suddenly, a purple light bloomed. An extremely ancient picture came out of Pangu's finger bone and poured into Feng Zichen's sea of consciousness. That was the picture when heaven and earth were first created. At the beginning of the untainted land, Pangu was exhausted and fell down. When his body turned into all things, a demon god of chaos suddenly appeared. Taking advantage of Pangu's weakness, he attacked the untainted land crazily, trying to destroy this world and recreate the chaos. At that time, Pangu's flesh and blood had all melted, leaving only a skeleton. He raised his right hand and pointed at the demon god of chaos's forehead. Even at this time, Pangu's trend of turning into all things did not weaken. Instead, it became more serious. He had just used all his remaining strength to kill the demon god of chaos. Before he could retract his arm, his skeleton scattered and merged into the untainted land. One of the finger bones stayed in the demon god of chaos's forehead and fell to the bottom of the ultimate with him. This demon god of chaos really doesn't know what's good for him. It was not easy to survive the heaven-splitting tribulation, but he doesn't know how to cherish it. Instead of going to the depths of the chaos to heal his injuries, he went to the untainted land to die. What a fool! The heaven-splitting tribulation was so terrifying that even the primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian, who was known as the primordial chaos and was indestructible and eternal, had fallen many times. Even the existences above the primordial chaos had fallen in the tribulation. It could be said to be the most widespread, most profound, and most powerful tribulation in history. That demon god of chaos could survive this tribulation. It was a good fortune that he could not ask for. But he went to die with all his heart, which made people a little speechless. Perhaps Panga's exhaustion gave him great confidence, which made him do such an unwise thing. At the end of the cultivation, the gap of a line was the gap between heaven and earth. It was unreachable. Why didn't that demon god of chaos understand? For example, Hongjun Taoist was now seriously injured and dying. If he appeared in front of Feng Zichen, he would definitely not dare to attack. The gap between him and Hongjun Taoist could no longer be described in words. Even if Hongjun Taoist lay still and let Feng Zichen attack him for years, he would not be hurt at all. They were not creatures of the same dimension. It was already a great fortune to be able to touch him, let alone hurt him. And that was the gap between Demon God of Chaos and Pangu. However, if it wasn't for that, how could I have the opportunity today? If Demon God of Chaos had run away at that time, this opportunity would have been gone. Putting away Pangu's finger bones, Feng Zichen turned around and looked at the Tree of World. At this time, the body of Demon God of Chaos had been completely swallowed by it. Because of this, the Tree of World had undergone an amazing transformation. The height of the tree was immeasurable, and the size of the tree crown was unknown. The size of the Tree of World had touched the concept of size. Chapter 219. Now, the Tree of World finally has the power to support the world. After looking at the Tree of World for a while, Feng Zichen nodded satisfactorily. The Tree of World's origin had surpassed most sage-to-be experts and was infinitely close to Daluo Jingxian. When it reached a level comparable to a sage, it could try to replace Mount Buzhou and support the Eldritch World. Moreover, the changes of the Tree of World were not limited to that. Khanate Daos manifested on its body and hundreds of millions of Daos surrounded it. It was clearly visible and shocking. Just one look at it could enlighten people. It was like a carrier of the great Tao in the world and could receive the great Tao. It was as if one could reach the end of the great Tao by following its branches and climbing up. No, it was not as if. It was real. If someone could withstand the boundless pressure and reach the top of the Tree of World, they would immediately become Daluo Jingxian without any repercussions. If the Tree of World went one step further and reached its crown, they would be enlightened by the great Tao and save hundreds of millions of years of cultivation. They would directly become Daluo Jingxian. It was like reaching the sky in one step. Is this the true power of the Chaos spiritual root? It's indeed much more powerful than the Khanate spiritual root. Reaching the crown of the Tree of World would make one Daluo Jingxian. There was nothing in the Eldritch World that could compare to the Tree of World. That's right. Only such a treasure could support the Eldritch World. Otherwise, if it was a Khanate spiritual root, it would be crushed by the Eldritch World's weight. Feng Zichen stopped paying attention to the Tree of World and looked at the 3,000 sectors. That was where the survival of the human race was. Countless light balls surrounded the Tree of World. They were magnificent and had endless Taoist rhymes flowing around them. Among them, the 3,000 sectors were the most dazzling and had the densest Taoist rhymes. These were the 3,000 sectors. They were the worlds formed by the origin of the Eldritch World and the Chaos Chi. They were the associated worlds of the Eldritch World. According to the normal course of history, after the Shaman Tribulation, these sectors absorbed the fragments of the Eldritch World and were born. After that, at the end of the investiture of the Gods' Tribulation, the 5 sages fought and completely shattered the primitive world. The fragments of heaven and earth flowed towards the millions of small, medium, and large worlds, causing them to evolve completely. Finally, after the journey to the West Calamity, after a long period of development, these large, medium, and small chiliocosms had already possessed a certain level of strength. Only then did they gradually begin to connect with the primordial world. But now, with the help of the Tree of World, more than a dozen worlds had been born among the 3,000 sectors, and more worlds were about to be born. Compared to the normal speed, it was an entire aeon ahead of time. What happened? I can only look but not enter? Seeing the birth of the great thousand realms, Feng Zichen casually picked one and stepped forward, intending to enter the great thousand realms to search for opportunities. However, there was a mysterious force that came and blocked him from the world, not allowing him to take a step forward. At the same time, the great thousand world that he was about to enter had also changed. The will of the world descended. It was incomparably vast, and the entire world was shaking, emitting a terrifying force that was ready to move. It seemed that as long as Feng Zichen dared to take a step forward, this force would attack him and kill him at all costs. Is it because I'm too powerful? A message appeared in Feng Zichen's sea of consciousness, allowing him to understand the reason for this change. The world had just been born, and the world had not yet stabilized. The rules of the Great Path were not yet perfect, and the entire world was extremely fragile. If he was not careful, he would be in danger of being destroyed. Daluo Jingxian was an existence that had achieved the Great Path. Its essence was already comparable to the Great Thousand Realms. Even if it was not as good as the Great Thousand Realms, the difference would not be too great. If such an existence rashly stepped into the new world, the aura of the Great Path that he carried would inevitably conflict with the Great Path that was born in the world itself. At that time, the already unstable world would be impacted by the Great Path. If it triggered a riot of the laws of heaven and earth, even if the world was not destroyed, its origin would be greatly damaged, and its grade would drop. Although the probability of this happening was very small, almost none. As long as Daluo Jingxian withdrew his strength with all his might, he could put an end to this. However, every great thousand world was a treasure of the primordial world. It was of great help to the evolution of the Great Path. Even if there was a slight possibility, the Great Path had to put an end to it. Therefore, in order to protect the new Great Thousand World, the Great Path would never allow Daluo Jingxian to step into it. At the very least, before the Great Thousand World stabilized, this situation would continue. Not only that, when the Great Thousand World was just born, the will of the world was hazy, and it did not have a clear understanding of things. Once it sensed a threat, it would definitely go all out and destroy everything that could threaten it. Even if there was no obstruction from the Great Path, as soon as Feng Zichen approached the Great Thousand World, what awaited him would probably be the full force of the world. It's fine if Daluo Jingxian can't enter. Anyway, there aren't many Daluo Jingxian in the human race. Moreover, this path of retreat is not prepared for Daluo Jingxian, but for those outstanding clansmen. As long as the clansmen can enter, there won't be a problem. Feng Zichen did not insist that he could not enter the Great Thousand World. No matter how good the opportunities of the Great Thousand World were, how could they compare to the opportunities of the primordial world? Previously, he wanted to enter because he was curious. However, if I can't enter, there's no harm in taking a look in advance. Finally, he was a little curious. Feng Zichen released his spiritual will and looked at the Great Thousand World from afar. With just a glance, everything in that world was reflected in Feng Zichen's eyes. It was an ancient world with mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, and stars. It was somewhat similar to the primordial world, but it was far from as vast as the primordial world. Even Mount Kunlun and Mount Meru were larger than this world. In fact, the essence of any of the primordial world's main stars far surpassed this world. This Great Thousand World is also, after getting used to the scenery of the primordial world, Feng Zichen felt that this world was extremely small and could not help but feel a little disappointed. As he continued looking, Feng Zichen discovered the aura of 6 lives. These were the connate god fiends born in this world. In terms of the origin of this world, at most, 9 connate god fiends could be born. Any more and it would hurt the origin of the world. In this aspect, it was far from being comparable to the primordial world. That was because, not to mention 9 connate god fiends, even if there were 9,000 or 90,000 connate god fiends, there might not be any in the primordial world. Hiss. From this, it can be seen that the origin of the primordial world is really thick beyond imagination. The strength of the great Taoist priest Pangu is really powerful. The more he knew, the more he understood how powerful Pangu was. Chapter 220. Is this the great wide world? It's a little disappointing. Feng Zichen retracted his divine sense and sighed. After observing for a period of time, he discovered that the origin of the great wide world was limited. The upper limit had been fixed, and Daluo Jingxian was its limit. In other words, Daluo Jingxian was the limit of cultivation in the great wide world. There was no possibility of attaining the primordial chaos. If he wanted to take a step forward, he had to leave this world, go to the primordial world, or rush to the chaos. Compared to the primordial world, the billions of worlds were just dust. In the primordial world, countless Daluo Jingxian and stronger primordial chaos experts could be born. There were even existences above the primordial chaos. That was because the primordial world was a world formed by Pangu when he broke through the origin of the chaos. After it was created, it absorbed the origin of Pangu and many chaos demon gods. That was why the primordial world was so powerful. In order to take a step forward and attain the great Tao, Pangu broke through to an indescribable realm. Thus, he broke through the origin of the chaos and created the primordial world to verify his great Tao. The origin of the chaos was damaged, and the 3,000 chaos demon gods were affected. They woke up from their cultivation and rushed to the depths of the chaos to stop Pangu from creating a world. After a great battle, the 3,000 chaos demon gods and Pangu died one after another. The primordial world became the final winner and obtained the greatest benefits. It created the current grand situation of the primordial world. There were as many Daluo Jingxian as there were dogs, and there were sage to be experts everywhere. The establishment of the primordial world was unique and could not be replicated. It was also the greatest creation in the entire chaos. That was because there was no second Pangu and 3,000 chaos demon gods in the entire chaos. Not to mention, they had to integrate their origin into a world. Being born in the primordial world is also a kind of opportunity. In the end, Feng Zichen sighed. Compared to the creatures born in the great wide world, the creatures of the primordial world were undoubtedly lucky. They were born knowing that there was a quasi-sage above Daluo Jingxian, primordial chaos above quasi-sage, and even more powerful realms above primordial chaos. They did not have to worry about the path ahead being cut off because there was no upper limit to the primordial world. There were infinite possibilities. Daluo Jingxian was the end of all living beings in the vast thousand domains. Moreover, the world's origin was limited, so the number of Daluo Jingxian was also limited. The predecessors had proven their Tao before. No matter how peerless their talents were, no matter how stunning the future generations were, there was no Tao that could be proven. It was truly despairing. Therefore, it was a great opportunity to be born in the primordial world. At the starting line, they already had the advantage. However, this is also good. Compared to the primeval age, the greater Kiliacosm is definitely much safer and more suitable for the postnatal human race to survive. When a world's origin was weak, the power of the laws of heaven and earth would also weaken accordingly. Perhaps the human race would be like fish in water in the great wide world. On the eve of the massacre tribulation, I will find an opportunity to send some of my people to the great thousand world to wait for the future. After secretly making up his mind, Feng Zichen waved his hand and took back the world tree. He turned around and flew up. He had stayed in the void end for quite some time. It was time to return to the primordial world. After all, there were still a lot of things waiting for him to deal with in the primordial world. Of course, more importantly, although the Khanate sword Dao had been condensed, it still needed to be verified with heaven and earth and imprinted in the primordial world's origin before it could be considered complete. Whoosh, whoosh, the void end was a huge whirlpool. Only then could it release endless suction force and suck in all the waste gas and impure air in the primordial world and sink to the bottom of the void end. It was also because of this that it was easy to enter the void end but difficult to leave. If one wanted to leave the void end, one could only use powerful strength to resist the omnipresent suction force of the void end and go against the flow. However, Feng Zichen was not one of them. As soon as he made his move, the void suddenly changed. A passage appeared that led to the outside world. It was the will of the void end that had descended and taken the initiative to send him away. If such treatment were to spread, countless people would be envious. Thank you. With a loud laugh, Feng Zichen walked into the passageway and left the void end. In the blink of an eye, 20,000 years have passed. Time really flies. Above the North Sea, Feng Zichen calculated with his fingers and knew that 20,000 years had passed since he fell into the void end. However, these 20,000 years were worth it. Thinking back to his experiences in the past 20,000 years, Feng Zichen was filled with excitement. He headed to the chaos and successfully attained the Tao of Daluo Jingxian. He obtained the recognition of the great Tao and became a Khanate god fiend. He devoured the body of the chaos fiend celestial and caused the world tree to transform. He successfully condensed the Khanate sword Tao and added another Khanate Tao to the primordial world. He could obtain the favor of heaven and earth and become a Khanate Tao ancestor. He obtained Pangu's finger bone and could suppress the destiny of the human race. He refined the void end Tao embryo and obtained a Khanate god fiend avatar. He had laid a firm foundation for controlling the void end in the future. Each of these fortuitous encounters alone was enough to shock the world. Furthermore, there were so many shocking opportunities stacked together. It was an opportunity that others could not even dream of. Of course, among these opportunities, apart from Daluo Jingxian, who had successfully attained the Tao, it was most important to obtain the recognition of the great Tao and be bestowed a divine name. Pangu's Zichen clan. This name wasn't just for show. It contained boundless meaning, great opportunities, great creation, and great luck. Pangu, the founder of the primordial world, could be said to be the father of all things. In the primordial world, anything related to him would be protected by heaven and earth. They would not be blessed and would have long luck. Before his name, he had the name Pangu. In the primordial world, it represented the authentic Pangu. Just like the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestral magi, they had an incomparably noble status and incomparable luck. Moreover, Feng Zichen's identity was recognized by the great Tao. Apart from the Pangu, no one could deny it. His status had risen from the lowest postnatal life form of the primordial world to the top Khanate saint of the primordial world. Moreover, he had inherited the name of Pangu. With this identity, Feng Zichen would not dare to be arrogant when he walked in the primordial world in the future. He would have to address him as fellow Taoist Zichen to show his respect for Pangu. If the current Feng Zichen went to the west, Taoist Zhuan-Ti would not dare to forcefully bring him back to Mount Meru like before. That way, he would be hated by heaven and earth and his luck would be damaged. With the importance that the Western saints placed on luck, they would not do anything that damaged their luck unless they had no choice. This identity can be considered the top second generation of the primordial world. Thinking of the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestral magi, Feng Zichen was a little excited. They were the top figures in the primordial world, existences that could do anything they wanted. With this identity and his trump card, Feng Zichen's future would definitely not be inferior to theirs. Why think so much? Now, it's more important to prove the sword Tao. Shaking his head, Feng Zichen said. Chapter 221. Above the North Sea, Feng Zichen held the Zichen sword in his hand and engraved 81 Khanate runes in the void, which were shining brightly. The runes were surrounded by Khanate Taoist rhymes and were surrounded by sword intent. They were runes that belonged to the Khanate sword Dao and were the cornerstone of it. When all 81 Khanate runes were born, Feng Zichen suddenly raised the Zichen sword in his hand and announced to the sky, "Heavens!" Today, the Pangu Zichen clan has peeped into the secrets of the Great Dao and created another Khanate Dao apart from the Khanate Dao. It's called the Sword Dao. Today, I want to establish the Sword Dao, integrate the sword theory of the primitive world, set the general outline of the Sword Dao, and write the Khanate sword pattern. I want to establish another path of transcendence for all living beings and add another Khanate Dao to the world. This will stabilize the primitive world and strengthen the origin of the world so that all living beings can transcend and the evolution of the heavenly Dao can accelerate. All living beings in the primitive world, regardless of whether they have money or not, can cultivate this Dao as long as they have the heart to seek the sword. Today, I follow the heavens and answer the Dao. I use the Khanate spiritual treasure Zichen sword to carry the Khanate sword Dao and turn it into a Dao inheriting weapon to gather the boundless luck of the sword Dao. Heaven and earth bear witness. Khanate sword Dao establish. As soon as he finished speaking, the world changed color and the entire North Sea dimmed. A terrifying force appeared above the North Sea and kept surging majestically, shocking the entire primitive world. This was the wrath of the heavenly Dao. Someone actually went against the heavens and transformed an acquired object into a Khanate Chi object. It was really unforgivable. Rumble. The reaction of the heavenly Dao is so strong. Feng Zichen said in shock as he suppressed the discomfort in his body. He was already Daoyuo Jingxian and his body was comparable to a Khanate spiritual treasure. However, his chi and blood were tumbling and his consciousness sea was turbulent with just a rumble of thunder. He was almost injured. If the real heavenly punishment struck down, it would be terrible. A thunderbolt would probably take half of his life. This divine punishment was definitely not at the level of Daoyuo Jingxian. It was specially prepared for sage-to-be experts. North Sea, what happened? Why would the heavenly Dao be so furious? Feeling the vast power of the heavenly Dao, many powerful cultivators looked towards the North Sea, wanting to see what had caused the heavenly Dao to be enraged and send down heavenly punishment. However, the power of the way of the heavens enveloped the entire North Sea, blocking the vision of the great adepts. For a moment, they were unable to see what was happening in the North Sea. The North Sea is Kuan Peng's territory. Does this have something to do with him? Not necessarily. A few years ago, Zenyuanzi went to the North Sea to look for the Kunpeng. He has been fighting with the Kunpeng in the North Sea and hasn't returned yet. Perhaps they were really angry and destroyed an important place in the North Sea, causing this disaster. Many great adepts couldn't see the situation in the North Sea, so they couldn't help but calculate in their hearts. However, the power of the way of the heavens suppressed everything. Even the secrets of the heavens were suppressed. Their calculation methods immediately lost their effect. However, they were really curious. They couldn't help but discuss with each other according to what they already knew. They related this matter to Kuan Peng and Zenyuanzi. Not to mention the many great adepts, the way of the heavens could block the spying outside the North Sea, but it couldn't block the gaze inside the North Sea. As soon as the change in the North Sea happened, 3 great adepts who stayed in the North Sea looked over. That's right. Hongjun really didn't lie to me this time. This child has indeed obtained a great opportunity in the ultimate. In the North Pole, the black tortoise sacred beast stroked its beard and said with a smile. As soon as Feng Zichen came out of the ultimate, the black tortoise sacred beast sensed it. The black tortoise holy beast knew that he must have obtained a great opportunity in the sinkhole just by seeing his cultivation as a zenith heaven golden immortal. However, after seeing that Feng Zichen was not injured, the black tortoise sacred beast retracted its gaze and no longer paid attention to him. Everyone had their own fate, and outsiders couldn't force it. Whatever opportunity Feng Zichen obtained had nothing to do with him, and he didn't care. However, Feng Zichen came to the North Sea this time to visit him, so he couldn't be born here. Otherwise, losing face was a small matter, but the death of his benefactor would affect his Dao heart. Therefore, the black tortoise sacred beast had been paying attention to Feng Zichen and tried its best not to let him be born. However, what the black tortoise sacred beast didn't expect was that as soon as he retracted his gaze, Feng Zichen couldn't wait to establish the Khanate sword Dao. Therefore, he angered the way of the heavens and attracted the heavenly punishment. This made it difficult for him to help. The heavenly punishment only came for one person, but if an outsider helped, the power of the heavenly punishment would multiply. At that time, it would be trouble for the two of them. Forget it, after all, Daluo Jingxian is immortal. Even the heavenly punishment can't kill him completely. If he falls in the heavenly punishment, I'll help him to be resurrected. It's a good thing that he falls once. It can make him remember and think more before he does anything. Thinking of this, the black tortoise sacred beast was relieved and silently watched the development of the situation. Daluo Jingxian was immortal. No matter how strong the heavenly punishment was, it couldn't kill Feng Zichen. It was good to let him suffer a little. After all, Feng Zichen's life had been too smooth since his debut. This wasn't good. Heavenly punishment? Who is that person? What kind of heaven-defying thing did he do? What made the way of the heavens so angry that it sent down the heavenly punishment of the sage to be level? On the other side, Zhen Yuanzi and Kunpeng, who were fighting, sensed the heavenly punishment and stopped at the same time and looked at Feng Zichen. What a pure Pangu aura! Pangu Zichen clan? I didn't expect that in addition to the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestors of sorcery, there are other authentic Pangu clans in the untainted land. But where did this person come from? Why haven't I heard of his name before? The first thing that attracted the two of them when they looked at Feng Zichen was not the congenital runes floating in the air, but the Pangu aura emitted by Feng Zichen. The aura was so pure that it was not inferior to the Pangu aura of the 3 pure ones and the 12 ancestors of sorcery. Clearly, this was another true lineage of Pangu. As everyone knew, in the untainted land, only the 3 pure ones, which were transformed by the primordial spirit of Pangu, and the 12 ancestors of sorcery, which were transformed by the essence and blood of the heart, were authentic Pangu clans. The rest, such as Xingtian, were congenital grand sorcerers, which were transformed by the blood of Pangu, and the congenital gods and demons, which were transformed by the remains of Pangu, were not authentic Pangu clans. Now, in the untainted land, there was suddenly an authentic Pangu clans. How could this not surprise the two of them? This was a big event that shocked the untainted land. What the two of them thought had nothing to do with Feng Zichen, and he didn't care about them. Because at this time, he was like an arrow on the bow, and he had to shoot. Chapter 222. Although he had long expected that the birth of the Khanate sword Dao would bring about a great calamity, he was also prepared, but he did not expect that the calamity would come so quickly and fiercely. It was far beyond what he could bear. For a moment, Feng Zichen felt a little regretful. He felt that he should not be so hasty. He should wait until his strength reached a higher level before trying to establish the Khanate sword Dao. However, at this point he could no longer retreat. He could only bite the bullet. Moreover, he had many trump cards, a lot of merit, and Pangu's luck. With all these advantages combined, he might have a chance to break through the heavenly punishment and establish the Khanate sword Dao. Khanate sword Dao, condense. Without waiting for the heavenly punishment to descend, Feng Zichen activated 8 Khanate runes and turned them into a sword of sword Dao. It carried the supreme sword intent and took the initiative to attack the sky. Rumble. Feng Zichen's actions seemed to be a provocation, which made the way of heaven even more furious. The entire cloud layer was tumbling and surging. A terrifying force gathered and turned into a mighty thunderbolt that struck down with a loud bang. With just one strike, the long sword formed by the sword Dao was cracked. It was full of cracks like porcelain that would break at any time. What an unfamiliar aura! At this time, Zhen Yuanzi and Kunpeng had just recovered from the shock and were attracted by the Khanate sword Dao. That is, a new Khanate Dao, a Khanate Dao that has never appeared before. It is a Khanate Dao transformed from a postnatal Dao. Only this can make the heavenly Dao so angry and send down a sage-level heavenly punishment. The two of them were very knowledgeable. After seeing this scene, how could they not guess what Feng Zichen's actions meant? Naturally, they understood the reason for the heavenly Tao's anger. Going against the Khanate Tao was a taboo of the heavenly Tao. It could not tolerate it. Anyone or anything that dared to do this would be punished by the heavenly punishment. Whether it was beneficial to the world or not, it was the same. It was the same. After all, to the heavenly Tao, punishing first and then rewarding was also a method. This person is indeed worthy of being Pangu's descendant. As soon as he was born, he did something that has never been done before. He wants to add another Khanate Tao to the primordial world, to pave a new path for all living beings. This person's comprehension is extremely high and he has great wisdom. The poor Wei is far inferior to him. Looking at Feng Zichen, who took the initiative to attack divine punishment, Zhen Yuanzi sighed with emotion. Kunpeng Taoist's expression changed, but he did not refute. Apparently, he agreed with Zhen Yuanzi's words. The post-celestial Tao was reversed into the pre-celestial Tao. This method was something that they would never have thought of. It wasn't until they saw this scene that they suddenly realized. So, confirming the Tao could be done this way. Using this method to attain the Tao was much more powerful than the Tao attainment methods that were circulating in the primordial world. In this regard, Feng Zichen was much more capable than they could ever imagine. The sudden appearance of an authentic Pangu was already a major event that shook the primordial world. But from the looks of it now, that was not all. There might be another Khanate Tao in the primordial world. What kind of storm would it cause? The primordial world was about to change again. Boom, boom, boom. Above the sky, after the thunderbolt struck down from the clouds, it did not stop. Instead, it continued to roll and gather strength, striking down 3 consecutive bolts of divine punishment thunder. In an instant, the long sword formed by the sword Tao could not withstand the power of divine punishment and shattered on the spot. It turned back into 81 Khanate runes and struggled in the sea of thunder. The power of divine punishment was extremely terrifying. The power of the Khanate runes was limited. They would not be able to last long in the sea of thunder and would be obliterated. At that time, the establishment of the Khanate sword Tao would be considered a complete failure. Then, divine punishment would find Feng Zichen. Divine punishment is so terrifying. Seeing the power of divine punishment, Feng Zichen could not help but feel his scalp tingle. However, establishing the Khanate sword Tao was related to his future path. He could not afford to fail. In the clouds, terrifying power filled the air. The 4th bolt of divine punishment thunder gradually formed and was about to strike. Seeing this, Feng Zichen did not dare to hesitate. He immediately calmed down and contacted the Tree of World. He planned to use its power to fight with his life on the line. After swallowing the body of the Chaos Fiend God, the Tree of World had undergone a huge transformation. Its origin had been improved like never before. Its strength was no less than that of the top grand divines in the primordial world, and was close to Daluo Jingxian. Although the power of the Tree of World could not make Feng Zichen as strong as a grand divines, it could make him as strong as a sage to be for a short time. In this way, it would be much easier to deal with the divine punishment at the sage to be level. However, just as the power of the Tree of World was about to enter Feng Zichen's body, something strange happened again. Boom! A mighty power came, shaking the entire North Sea, no, the entire primordial world. Then, under the incredulous gaze of the grand divines, tens of thousands of Tao fell. The origin of heaven and earth appeared in the world and smashed toward the divine punishment that covered the entire North Sea. This, is the primordial world going to change? The origin of heaven and earth is fighting with the way of heaven. Seeing this scene, the group of great divines all felt that this matter was extremely absurd. As 2 sides of the same coin, how could the way of heaven and the origin of heaven and earth fight? However, what was happening in front of them was telling them that such a ridiculous thing had really happened. At this moment, even the sages who did not pay attention to this matter could not help but look down at the North Sea. In the sky above the North Sea, the divine punishment was suddenly attacked and began to collapse uncontrollably. The attack of the origin of heaven and earth was equivalent to the attack of the primordial world. How many people in the primordial world could resist it? The divine punishment at the sage-to-be level was naturally no match for it. Of course, even if the divine punishment had the strength, it would not dare to attack the origin of heaven and earth. That was the origin of heaven and earth. It was the foundation of the primordial world, and also the foundation of the way of heaven. Once it was damaged, it would be a big deal and the consequences would be unimaginable. The way of heaven would not attack itself. Well, what's going on? This ridiculous scene made Feng Zichen a little confused. He did not know the reason at all. However, after all, he had become Daluo Jingxian. He was at a different level. He was more distant and ethereal. In the blink of an eye, he regained his composure and deduced the reason for this matter by following his perception. I see. Although the birth of the Khanate Sword Dao was a heaven-defying act, it could bring unimaginable benefits to the primordial world. In order to maintain the order of the primordial world, the way of heaven had to attack the Khanate Sword Dao and stop it from doing heaven-defying things. However, the origin of heaven and earth was different from the way of heaven. It did not care whether the Khanate Sword Dao was heaven-defying or not. It only knew that if the Khanate Sword Dao was established, it would be strengthened. The primordial world would also be strengthened. Anything that was beneficial to the primordial world, whether good or evil, would be protected by the origin of heaven and earth. Therefore, when it saw that the way of heaven wanted to destroy the Khanate Sword Dao, it could not help but attack. It descended into the world and destroyed the divine punishment. Chapter 223. However, although the divine punishment dissipated, it did not disappear. It existed in another form. In the void, dark clouds rolled and thunder rumbled. There seemed to be divine halls, immortal palaces, pagoda, heavenly soldiers, and giant deities beating drums in the sky. All kinds of strange phenomena appeared one by one. Gradually, a vast world was formed in the sky. It was magnificent and colorful. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the world. Feng Zichen was very familiar with this world. Its appearance and aura were exactly the same as the nine-cloud heavenly realm, which evolved from the nine-cloud thunder territory in the Thunderlock. In the future, the nine-cloud heavenly realm was the headquarters of the Thunder Department, where the primitive thunderbolts were operated. Its power was not only to control the clouds and rain, but also to control the disasters and blessings of heaven. It could control the balance of things and people. It could control life and death. It had the power to send the tribulation on behalf of heaven. Its appearance meant that the heavenly punishment had silently changed into a slightly weaker heavenly tribulation. Different from the divine punishment, the tribulation was the test of the way of heaven for everything in the primitive land. It set different standards according to the strength of the target. It would leave immediately after the fight. As for whether the target was dead or alive, it depended on his own strength. If he passed it, he would live. If he failed, he would die. However, the way of heaven was not as perfect as it was in the future. It had made all kinds of rules. There was no concept of the tribulation in the primitive land. The tribulation was the result of the return of the righteous gods after the apatheicized tribulations and the operation of the order of heaven and earth. Before that, there had never been a tribulation in the primitive land. But now, with the intervention of the origin of heaven and earth, the way of heaven had changed inexplicably and evolved the tribulation in advance. Of course, the tribulation was not as perfect as it was in the future. It only appeared for the things that defied the natural order. From now on, whenever something defied the natural order was born, there would be no more divine punishment. Instead, it would be transformed into a tribulation. It left a glimmer of hope for it to show the virtue of heaven. Tribulation? Interesting. This way may be very promising. The sages were connected with the way of heaven. Therefore, when the way of heaven changed, the 6 sages immediately sensed it. Moreover, he could faintly sense that there was a great opportunity in the heavenly tribulation. Therefore, each and every one of them began to calculate silently in their hearts. No one knew what they were planning. I wonder if this change is good or bad for the Khanate sword Dao. In the North Sea, Feng Zichen said worriedly as he looked at the 81 innate runes below the tribulation clouds. Since the heavenly tribulation was targeted at the Khanate sword Dao, it could only be overcome by itself. If Feng Zichen were to intervene, it would probably cause an unforeseen event. Not only would he not be able to help the innate sword Dao, but he might even lead himself into a calamity. Therefore, the success or failure of this heavenly tribulation depended entirely on the accumulation of the Khanate sword Dao. Boom! The heavenly thunders were raining down from the 9-cloud sky realm, each one more ferocious than the last. Every single one of those dazzling streaks of lightning was thicker and larger than a mountain. When they struck down, they caused the glaciers to shatter and the void to explode. At first, the heavenly tribulation was struck by golden, silver, and purple lightning. In the end, the power became stronger and stronger, carrying all kinds of attributes. Multicolored lightning began to wreak havoc, splitting the heavens. Boom! A streak of 5-colored lightning struck down and turned into 5 streaks of lightning, blasting on the Khanate runes. It was the Khanate godly thunder of 5 elements. In the lightning, the Khanate runes were scattered and dimmed. Khanate Taoist connotation gradually disappeared as if they were going to return to their original state. Because the heavenly tribulation was too terrifying, it was not much weaker than the heavenly punishment. The difference was that the heavenly punishment was endless until it was destroyed. However, the heavenly tribulation was different. It was limited by time and quantity. According to Feng Zichen's calculation, this heavenly tribulation was called the 9-cloud heavenly tribulation, the first one in the primitive land. It was divided into 9 layers, each with 12 streaks of lightning. There were 108 streaks of lightning in total. In other words, as long as the Khanate sword Dao could withstand the 108 streaks of lightning, it could successfully pass the heavenly tribulation and integrate into the origin of heaven and earth. It would completely become a part of the Khanate sword Dao. Unfortunately, the Khanate sword Dao was only a product of Daluo. Compared to the sage-to-be heavenly tribulation, it was too weak. It could not withstand the first layer of the heavenly tribulation and was showing signs of returning to the Khanate sword Dao. This scene made Feng Zichen extremely anxious, but there was nothing he could do to help. This feeling of not being able to use one's strength was truly depressing. Who is that person in the heavenly punishment? The Pangu aura on his body is so pure. This is another authentic Pangu. Also, he and the Khanate Dao in front of him are extremely unfamiliar. They are existences that have never been heard of. He is establishing a new Khanate Dao. This heavenly punishment is caused by this. However, the condition of his Khanate Dao is not very good. It seems that he is going to fail. The heavenly punishment was replaced by the heavenly tribulation, and the power of the heavenly path that filled the sky above the North Sea also disappeared. This caused the North Sea to return to the attention of the powerful beings. Therefore, everything that happened in the North Sea was clearly displayed in the eyes of the powerful beings. Immediately, there was a wave of shocked voices. Whether it was the authentic Pangu or the new Khanate Dao, they were enough to move them, not to mention the 2 things that happened at the same time. However, among these powerful beings, the 3 saints were the most shocked. They were Tai Ching, Zhuanti, and Yua. Others did not know the origin of Feng Zichen. They only thought that he was a part of the Pangu's origin and an innate saint born from it. He had been living in seclusion in the primordial world and had only come out today after he had achieved his Dao. He planned to amaze the world with a single feat. However, the 3 of them had all come into contact with Feng Zichen. How could they not know his origin? His foundation was just a mere postnatal. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, he would turn from a postnatal life form to a Khanate life form? In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a Khanate saint. Moreover, he was the most authentic Pangu in the primordial world. With the ability of a saint, if he was willing to pay a price and spend a lot of Khanate origin, he could still transform an ordinary postnatal life form into a Khanate godfiend. However, to transform a postnatal life form into an authentic Pangu, not to mention a saint, even the heavenly Dao could not do it personally. It was also impossible to transform a Khanate godfiend into an authentic Pangu. Therefore, how could they not be shocked by such a good fortune that far exceeded their imagination? This child has a great opportunity and a great secret. At this moment, the three saints were curious about Feng Zichen at the same time. They did not know if it was good or bad for him. Seeing that the Khanate sword Dao was about to collapse and turn into an postnatal Dao at any time, the origin of heaven and earth could not help but make a move. Rumble. Above the North Sea, Dao sounds resounded and heavenly flowers fell. Accompanied by these sacred phenomena, 10,000 Dao appeared and hung down boundless Dao runes, enveloping the Khanate sword talisman. Chapter 224. In an instant, the Khanate rune shone again and the Khanate Taoist rhyme around it became more profound. Purple chi rose and filled the air with an ancient aura. A powerful aura burst out from the Khanate rune, carrying with it a supreme sword will. It swept across all directions and wiped out all the lightning around it. The first lightning tribulation was over. Boom! As soon as the first lightning tribulation was over, the second lightning tribulation fell impatiently. 12 heavenly thunderbolts struck at the Khanate rune in an overwhelming manner. Buzz! The Khanate rune was not afraid. It trembled slightly and suddenly condensed in the air, turning into the sword Dao again. It exuded a supreme sword will and attacked the heavenly thunderbolts. During this process, the Chaos Dao did not retreat. It still hung down endless Khanate Taoist rhyme, shrouding the sword Dao and constantly increasing its power. Rustle. The sword Dao weaved back and forth in the heavenly thunderbolts. The sword body flashed with a cold light and a sharp sword light shot out, destroying all the lightning around it and turning it into the purest Khanate Taoist rhyme. As the sword body moved, the Khanate Taoist rhyme transformed from the heavenly thunderbolts, immediately rushed toward the sword Dao and merged into its body, strengthening its origin. Whoosh! After gaining the benefits, the sword Dao first shook like a human, then pointed the tip of the sword to the sky and suddenly accelerated, rushing directly into the 9 heavens lightning tribulation. However, the Khanate Taoist rhyme contained in the second lightning tribulation could not satisfy it. Therefore, under its instinctive desire, the sword Dao rushed in without waiting for the third lightning tribulation to fall. Rumble! Endless sword light gushed out from the sword Dao, carrying all kinds of power. In the blink of an eye, it covered the second and third lightning tribulations, piercing thousands of holes. Then all kinds of power erupted. There was the surging of earth, fire, water and wind, the endless cycle of the 5 elements, yin and yang, all kinds of Taoist rhyme were in it. The second and third lightning tribulations were completely broken into pieces, turning into Khanate Taoist rhyme that filled the sky and was devoured by the sword Dao. This was Feng Zichen's self-created sword Dao remarkable power, the beginning of the sword, the unification of all Taoist rhyme. In this way, the second and third lightning tribulations were over. It was as if shattering 2 layers of lightning tribulations at once had given the sword Dao a boost of confidence. Its confidence, without hesitation, it rushed into the 4th lightning tribulation. However, the 9 heavens lightning tribulation changed. Every 3 lightning tribulations, its power would increase. If the power of the first 3 levels of the thunder calamity was equivalent to that of a demi-saint who had killed 1 corpse, then the demi-saint would be very powerful. Then, the power of the middle 3 levels of thunder trial was equivalent to that of a pre-saint who had killed 2 corpses. The power of the last 3 levels of thunder trial was equivalent to that of a pre-saint who had killed 3 corpses. If a sword of sword Dao were to enter recklessly, how could it end well? Boom! Lightning struck down, causing the heavens to fall and the earth to split. Ghosts and deities cried out, as if the world was furious. It was incomparably terrifying, erupting with endless lightning that was deafening. It was a vast expanse. Nothing could be seen except for the heavenly tribulation. Buzz! The sword of swordsmanship trembled slightly. It had already climbed to the highest peak that it could currently reach. Innate Taoist rhymes filled the air and sublimated to the extreme, as if it was about to merge with heaven and earth. It heavens and rill. It eternal. Clang. When the huge heavenly lightning struck its body, sparks flew in all directions. It was as if iron was being hammered, and the sound was ear-piercing. At the same time, when the heavenly lightning tribulation struck the sword Tao, some of the Taoist rhymes around it merged into its body and strengthened the sword talisman. At this moment, it was as if heaven and earth were the furnace, yin and yang were the fire, lightning was the hammer, Taoist rhymes were the materials, and the heavenly Tao was the craftsman. It gathered all kinds of incredible power to temper the Khanate sword Tao. Clang, clang, clang. Another series of thunderous booms could be heard as dense lightning bolts struck on the innate sword Tao's body one after another. It was as if a giant hammer was hammering on iron, causing sparks to fly in all directions. It was simply too shocking. The lightning bolts were like heavy hammers that kept tempering the Khanate sword Tao. They pressed Taoist rhymes into its body and strengthened its essence, making it stronger and stronger. In the end, the sword Tao dispersed and turned into 81 Khanate runes. They floated in the lightning tribulation and emitted colorful lights. It illuminated the void around it. Khanate Taoist rhymes filled the air, purple chi rose, and a rain of light fell. When the lightning tribulation in the middle 3 levels could no longer help it, the Khanate sword Tao erupted. The sword Tao reappeared and released a dazzling sword light. Rumble. Essence, chi, and spirit appeared, water, fire, and wind surged, and the sun, moon, and stars shone brightly. The 3 treasures of heaven, earth, and man appeared together, triggering the power of the 3, disrupting all order and destroying all existence, shattering the 3 levels of lightning tribulation. Just like that, the 4th, 5th, and 6th levels of lightning tribulation were passed. After being provoked one after another, the heavenly tribulation was completely enraged. Above, a sea of lightning rolled and surged. Now, it was completely rioting and poured down like an ocean. It was comparable to the power of the 3-corpse quasi-saint. However, the Khanate sword Tao was not afraid because it was too powerful at this moment. Half of its foot was merging with heaven and earth. Its essence was sublimating and surpassing itself. It was undergoing a transformation. Therefore, it was unprecedentedly powerful. Boom! Lightning erupted and pierced through the void, causing this place to shatter into pieces. Vast and mighty sword light rose from the sword Tao. It was dazzling like the sun, illuminating the universe and the universe, releasing billions of rays of light. Every ray of light was a divine ability that contained sword intent. However, at this moment, the heavenly lightning raged and the endless sea of lightning smashed down, drowning the Khanate sword Tao. The power of the last 3 levels of heavenly tribulation was too powerful. The sword Tao was within it, but it was dispersed in just a moment. It turned into Khanate runes and struggled in the sea of lightning. The light around it dimmed and was about to shatter. The void trembled as the power of the primordial Tao surged over. Khanate Taoist rhymes filled the air, forcefully condensing the Khanate sword Tao and reforming it in the lightning. Every Khanate rune contained lightning and was fully tempered. Although it was dim, once it endured, it was destined to reach a higher level, become stronger, and be more compatible with heaven and earth. Bang! At this moment, the heavenly tribulation had reached the end, and the most terrifying thing happened. The last 3 levels of heavenly tribulation began to merge, turning into a supreme God shadow. Behind it, heavenly tribulation rolled and lightning lingered. His face was blurry and could not be seen clearly. Only a pair of purple divine eyes with a terrifying light could be seen clearly. Those were the divine eyes formed by the power of heavenly punishment. They contained the aura of destruction and had the unique power of heavenly punishment. After all, it was a heavenly tribulation evolved from heavenly punishment. Moreover, it was the first time it had appeared, so it was inevitable that it would be imperfect and carry a trace of heavenly punishment's shadow. Now, the furious heavenly tribulation evolved the power of heavenly punishment from this trace of shadow and blasted towards the Khanate sword Tao. Chapter 225. In order to allow the Khanate Sword Dao to be born, the origin of heaven and earth did not hesitate to cheat it. It increased its power one after another, causing it to not be damaged in the heavenly tribulation. Instead, it became stronger and stronger. It was about to pass the 9 heavens of thunder tribulation and be completely born in the world. At this moment, the heavenly Tao could not help but make a move. As a selfless existence, the heavenly Tao could no longer tolerate the origin of heaven and earth. It kept cheating the Khanate Sword Tao and breaking the fairness. Therefore, it secretly strengthened the strength of the heavenly tribulation and evolved a trace of the power of heavenly punishment, returning the situation to the level that it thought was the fairest. Chi! A purple light flew out from the eyes of the emperor, carrying the power of heavenly punishment. It destroyed the void and shattered the great Tao. In the blink of an eye, it came to the side of the Khanate Sword Dao and shattered the sword body that it had just reassembled. It was the 9 heavens tribulation light. It gathered billions of thunderbolts and merged many tribulations into the Khanate divine light. It contained the power of yin and yang and had the power to command all kinds of tribulations. It could create and destroy all things. It was the supreme achievement of the Khanate Thunder Dao. It was also the foundation of the heavenly Tao to command all things and punish all things. It was one of the strongest defensive methods of the heavenly Tao. Rumble. Terrifying power raged, as if the universe was collapsing and the great Tao was collapsing. It was a scene of the end of the world. Even with the help of 10,000 Tao runes, the Khanate Sword Dao was still struggling crazily in the tribulation light. It was difficult to reassemble the sword body. The brilliance around it was dimming, and the Khanate Tao runes were fading. At this moment, it was not degenerating into the post-celestial Sword Dao, but was truly shattering. The power of the 9 heavens tribulation light was far beyond Feng Zichen's imagination. It was extremely powerful. It directly destroyed the Khanate Sword Dao, wanting to make it completely disappear from the primitive world and erase all traces of its existence. At this moment, Feng Zichen was really panicking. The Khanate Sword Dao contained his blood and sweat, and it was related to his future path. If it was destroyed just like that, his loss would be great. The more anxious he was, the more Feng Zichen calmed down. Countless ideas flashed through his mind, and sparks of wisdom burst forth. In an instant he thought of a feasible method. First, Feng Zichen secretly mobilized the power of the Tree of World and temporarily raised his strength to the Sage to be level. Then he shouted into the void. Fellow Taoists, if the Khanate Sword Dao is completed, boundless fortune will gather and boundless merit will descend. Therefore today, Zichen shamelessly asks for the help of all sword cultivators to establish the Khanate Sword Dao in the untainted land. We will pave the way for all living beings and create a prosperous era of Sword Dao. I hope that the sword cultivators of the wilderness can lend a hand to the Khanate Sword Dao and overcome the heavenly tribulation. The voice was loud and resounded throughout the untainted land. Every living creature heard it clearly, and they all looked in the direction of the North Sea. There were many experts who used swords in the primordial world. In fact, there were many of them. They might not have the concept of swordsmanship in their hearts, but after using the sword for a long time, they would more or less have their own understanding of the sword in their hands. And these insights were the foundation of the Khanate Sword Dao, the nutrients for its growth. If he could absorb all of these insights, his Khanate Sword Dao would definitely be able to take another step forward and become even more perfected. At that time, the 9 heavens thunder tribulation would be nothing. Gather the wisdom of all the sword cultivators in the primordial world and add bricks and tiles to the Khanate Sword Dao. They would constantly perfect it and break through the heavenly tribulation in one fell swoop. That was the idea that Feng Zichen had thought of. How could he make the Khanate Sword Dao perfect with his own strength? Only by gathering the strength of everyone could it be completely perfected and stand in the primordial world. After all, the Khanate Sword Dao was not Feng Zichen's Dao alone, but the Dao of all living beings in the primordial world. If this Dao was completed, he would not be the only one who would benefit. All living beings in the primordial world would benefit at the same time. Sure enough, as Feng Zichen finished speaking, sword intent rose from the primordial world, bringing with it countless insights of the sword Dao, and surged into the Khanate sword Dao. That was all the insights that the experts of the primordial world had about their own swords. Although the Khanate Dao that these experts had attained was not the Khanate sword Dao, what had accompanied them as they grew and protected their Dao bodies was the sword in their hands. They used the sword as a weapon to kill strong enemies and protect the great Dao, walking to the peak step by step. Although they could not reach the point of treating the sword as their life, they still had a different kind of feelings. Now, someone had stepped forward and created the Khanate sword Dao out of nothing in the primordial world. For the countless sword cultivators of the primordial world, they had gathered boundless luck and opened the door to heaven. This was a major event that would benefit countless sword cultivators and themselves. As a member of the sword cultivators, how could they stay out of it? How could they not step forward? Therefore they moved. They raised the sword in their hands, poured their insights into the sword, and slashed in the direction of the North Sea. That sword was dazzling, and its brilliance spread throughout the vast universe. That sword contained their desire for the Khanate sword Dao and their determination to establish the Khanate sword Dao. Rumble. The resplendent sword light carried an unparalleled force as it brazenly slashed into the light of tribulation, destroying the light of tribulation that enveloped the Khanate sword Dao. Immediately, the surrounding void was cleared. Then, the resplendent sword light dispersed with a bang, turning into billions of strands of Khanate light that merged with the Khanate sword Dao. Buzz, buzz, buzz. After a violent tremor, the Khanate sword Dao also collapsed into countless Khanate light that scattered in the world. What's going on? Even Feng Zichen did not expect such a sudden change. Why did the Khanate sword Dao shatter all of a sudden? Just as he was puzzled, the scene changed again. The Khanate light that scattered in the world suddenly condensed again and turned into Khanate runes again. However, at this time, there were no longer 81 Khanate runes, but 240. With the help of countless sword cultivators of the primordial world, the Khanate sword Dao had evolved further. The Khanate runes that formed its foundation had changed from 81 to 240, making it more complete and closer to the Khanate Dao of the primordial world. At the same time, its power had also increased like never before. It was as if the entire primordial world was shaking, and a terrifying power was emitted. 240 Khanate runes gathered and turned into a shocking giant sword. Innate Taoist rhymes swirled around the giant sword, releasing a boundless sword will that was vast and mighty. Its body was unbelievably large. Just by lying in the air, it blocked the light and caused the North Sea to fall into darkness. As soon as the giant sword was formed, it rotated with a bang and slashed at the Emperor's shadow in the sky. As the giant sword slashed across, a huge crack appeared in the void. It stretched for tens of thousands of miles as if it had split the world apart. The entire North Sea could be seen clearly. Inside the void crack, there was darkness. It was the purest darkness. Nothing existed, and it seemed to be able to devour one's soul. It was extremely terrifying. Chapter 226. As the giant sword waved, the terrible black crack kept moving forward. In an instant, it came to the side of the 9 clouds' heavenly tribulation. It was like a giant mouth that wanted to swallow the sky. However, the great Emperor Shadow was the incarnation of the heavenly way. Its strength was unfathomable, far exceeding that of an ordinary sage to be. How could it be afraid of the Khanate sword Tao? Swoosh, swoosh. The great Emperor Shadow's purple eyes were flowing with the power of the heavenly way. It emitted 9 rays of tribulation light, which attracted the 9 clouds' thunderbolts and various tribulation chi. It turned into a vast celestial domain, which covered the sky and the sun. It pressed down on the giant sword. Rumble. Terrifying fluctuations came, and the void collapsed. The sky above the North Sea was completely broken. There was nothing left except for the giant sword and the great Emperor Shadow. One had the help of the origin of heaven and earth, and the comprehension of countless sword cultivators, which made it very powerful. The other had the help of the heavenly way, which gathered endless thunderbolts and tribulation chi. It was vast and boundless. The two sides were in a stalemate, and neither side could defeat the other. Is it still not working? Looking at the Khanate sword Tao in a stalemate with the heavenly tribulation, Feng Zichen frowned. Originally, the power of the heavenly tribulation was limited. After the 108 heavenly thunders, its power would be exhausted. The heavenly tribulation would be over. However, the origin of heaven and earth helped the Khanate sword Tao, which made the heavenly way secretly increase the power of the heavenly tribulation. If the Khanate sword Tao wanted to survive the heavenly tribulation, it had to destroy the great Emperor Shadow and completely destroy the Nine Clouds heavenly realm. However, looking at the situation above, the Khanate sword Tao and the great Emperor Shadow were evenly matched. Neither side could defeat the other, and there was no hope of destroying it. Moreover, the origin of heaven and earth could not be manifested for a long time. If it continued to drag on, it would be extremely unfavorable for the Khanate sword Tao. When the origin of heaven and earth's power disappeared, the Khanate sword Tao would be no match for the great Emperor Shadow. It would only be destroyed. At that time, the Khanate sword Tao would disappear completely if it could not survive the heavenly tribulation. Khanate sword Tao? Interesting. He's a great talent. It's a pity that he's not a disciple of the poor way. On Kunlun Mountain, after the Grand Pure One learned about Feng Zichen's background from the Grand Pure One, he could not help but look at him deeply and sigh regretfully. This person's opportunity was truly heaven-defying. If he could enter the sect of Jie School, he would definitely be able to increase the luck of Jie School and overshadow the other three sections. Of course, the Prime Clear Sage was not the only one who thought so. At this moment, the two saints, Yuqing and Taiqing, also had the same thought. Not only that, but Feng Zichen, as a Panga descendant, was obviously more suitable to inherit their mantle. Under their guidance, it would not be difficult for him to become the primordial chaos Daluo Jingxian in the future. If he could take her as his disciple, there would be many benefits. Unfortunately, the three pure ones were not fated to be together. That day, after Taoist Taiqing became a saint, he wanted to take Feng Zichen as his disciple, but he was rejected. The Grand Pure One was not angry. He only smiled and did not insist. He planned to settle the matter of taking in a disciple in the future. However, he did not expect things to change so quickly. In the blink of an eye, Feng Zichen had become an authentic Panga descendant and a Khanate godfiend. At this time, it would be difficult to take him in as a disciple. How could Nuwa let him go? Sigh. I didn't expect junior sister Nuwa to take advantage of him. The Prime Clear Sage retracted his gaze from Feng Zichen and said enviously, "That's right. Nuwa did not do anything. She just stayed in the palace of Empress Hua in peace and obtained an authentic descendant of the Pangu for no reason. How could she not be envious? The human race was created by Nuwa and was innately linked to her. Therefore, no matter what form Feng Zichen transformed into, the connection between him and Nuwa could not be severed. That was because without Nuwa, the human race would not have been born, and Feng Zichen would not have been born. How could the grace of creation be given up just like that? Not to mention, when Feng Zichen was young, he had received Nuwa's teachings through space. On the path of cultivation after that, he had also received help from Nuwa many times and had a great karma with her. In that case, it was even more impossible to cut ties with Nuwa. Logically speaking, if a human wanted to take an outsider as his master, he had to first obtain Nuwa's consent before he could perform the ceremony of taking her as his master and disciple. However, there were many humans and it was not easy to cultivate. If everyone had to obtain Nuwa's consent before taking her as his master. Not to mention whether Nuwa was annoying or not, even if it was delayed and they missed the opportunity to take her as his master, it would also be a lot of trouble. Therefore, this matter of course had never been truly implemented, and Nuwa had never cared. However, if one were to really take it seriously, taking her as his master without Nuwa's consent did not count. Not to mention someone like Feng Zichen who was deeply involved with Nuwa. If he really went to take her as his master without Nua's consent, not only would it not count, but he would also owe her a lot of karma. For saints, calamity would not befall them, and karma would not affect them. There were not many things in the world that could threaten them. And karma was one of them. This thing would not cause any harm to their bodies, but it would affect their cultivation and prevent them from improving. This was the most fatal thing for saints. Not being able to advance on the path of Tao was no different from death. Therefore, once saints formed karma with others, they would think of ways to end it so as not to drag down their own cultivation. The two saints, Junti and Jane, were powerless to end the karma they owed Taoist Red Cloud, but they were also afraid that it would affect their own cultivation. Therefore, when Red Cloud was in danger, they stood aside and watched him die, ending the karma. The saint of the high Tao did not want to owe Nua karma, which was why he sighed. Of course, even if he was willing to owe her karma, Nua might not agree. After sighing, Taoist Xianxia's expression suddenly turned serious. He looked at the Khanate sword Tao above the North Sea and muttered, "Now that the Khanate sword Tao is facing a tribulation, it is in danger." As the master of the celestial slaying sword and holding the Qingping sword as well as several Khanate spiritual swords, poor Wei cannot remain indifferent. I must lend him a hand. As he spoke, the saint took out the Qingping sword from beside him. Then, he took out the immortal slaying sword, the immortal slaughtering sword, the immortal trapping sword, and the immortal ending sword from the immortal slaying sword formation. The Khanate sword Tao has contributed greatly to the primordial world and is of great use to all living beings. It must be used. Khanate sword intent, go. The saint pointed at the 5 Khanate spiritual swords beside him. Instantly, the 5 swords shone brightly, and Khanate Taoist rhymes circulated around them. Supreme sword intent erupted and rushed into the 9 heavens, shattering the clouds above Mount Kunlun. Chapter 227. The words of the saints were the will of the heavens. They could change the rules of the world and distort the world's understanding. As the prime clear saints' words fell, the heavens and earth reacted. Countless rules manifested, weakening the power of the great emperor's shadow. At the same time, the entire untainted land was shaking. The aura of the innate sword Tao appeared, emitting a strange Tao rhythm. It was as if the innate sword Tao had already appeared in the untainted land. This was the power of a saint. If I want something, the heavens must have it. The moment the prime clear sage uttered the word Xiantian sword Tao, the Xiantian sword Tao would immediately appear in this world. From this, one could see the might of a sage. Boom, 5 streaks of sword light rose from Mount Kunlun, shaking the heavens and earth. They shattered the endless void and directly arrived above the North Sea, tearing the emperor's shadow into pieces. They were the immortal exterminating 4 swords and the Qingping sword, bringing with them the insights of the sword Tao of the prime clear sage. Even a trace of the sword will of a saint had the power to destroy the world, let alone the sword will of a lifetime. Even the emperor's shadow was no match for him. Fellow Taoists, poor Wei has already made her move. The rest is up to you. Don't let outsiders look down on us sword cultivators. The prime clear sage suddenly said after keeping the 5 great innate godly swords. Previously, only some Daluo Jingxian had helped. The quasi-saints had yet to make a move. Now that the prime clear sage had taken the lead and made his move, it was their turn. Ha! How can I not have a share in the success of the Khanate sword Tao? Within the Lingxiao Hall, Di Jun laughed out loud when he heard the voice of the Xianxia saint. He waved the sun god sword in his hand and slashed towards the 9 heavens' heavenly tribulation. It was the king's sword, the emperor's sword, and the emperor's sword. It was the sword of the Lord of heaven and earth. It was the sword that commanded the universe. The sword light was so resplendent that even the light of the sun was overshadowed, completely losing its color. His imposing aura suppressed the world, and it terrified the myriad of living beings in the world. It caused all living beings to arouse the desire to submit, and they couldn't help but bow down in worship. In the Blood Sea, Taoist Mingi didn't care about his injuries as he activated the Yuan Tu and Avici swords. Suddenly, a blood-red light exploded, stirring up boundless murderous intent. It swept across the wilderness and shot towards the North Sea. Their attacks seemed to be a sign. Behind them, 13 Precinct Grand Cultivators appeared and unleashed supreme sword wills that surged toward the Khanate Sword Dao. With this help, the innate Sword Dao changed again. The 108 innate runes shattered, and when they gathered again, there were 365 innate runes, which was exactly the number of heavenly cycles. Boom! The reassembled Khanate Sword Dao merely shook slightly, and an unparalleled power erupted, sweeping through the void and destroying the heavenly tribulation. Just like that, the 9 heavens tribulation was past. Innate Sword Dao. Crack! The Khanate Sword Dao continued to vibrate, breaking through the boundless void and arriving at the origin of heaven and earth. It completely merged with it and became the cornerstone of the primordial world. In the next moment, an indescribable sword slowly appeared in the center of the sky. It was so beautiful, so grand, and so dazzling. It was as if all the words of praise in the world could be found on him, so that the entire primordial world could be clearly seen. He was infinitely close to perfection. Rumble! The great Tao was rumbling, and the universe was shaking. Thousands of Daos manifested and Dharma laws descended. Boundless innate Taoist rhymes fell and covered the entire untainted land. Slowly, an illusory figure appeared in the center of the myriad Daos. His purple robe fluttered in the wind, making him look extraordinary. His entire body emitted a distant and ancient aura. That was the aura of the first living being in the world. It belonged to the oldest and most powerful living being in the primordial world, Hong Jun. At that moment, Hong Jun, the heavenly Tao, descended. The birth of the Khanate Sword Dao was a major event that shook the primordial world. It could strengthen the origin of the primordial world and promote the evolution of the primordial world. Its influence was endless and far-reaching, enough to change everything in the future. It had immeasurable merit in the primordial world. Therefore, the heavenly Tao descended to personally award Feng Zichen. At that moment, there were no auspicious clouds in the sky, no auspicious aura descending, no heavenly flowers falling, and no golden lotuses growing on the ground. No sacred phenomenon appeared. That was because there was no need for it. The appearance of the phenomenon was to set off the extraordinariness of the event. It was glory and represented the recognition of heaven and earth. What phenomenon could compare to the descent of the heavenly Tao? It could show more glory and represent the recognition of heaven and earth. After the descent of the heavenly Tao, any more phenomena would seem superfluous. You, Pangazichen clan. You created the Khanate Sword Dao and have done great deeds since ancient times. You have immeasurable merit. From now on, you are the Sword Ancestor. You can enjoy the destiny of heaven and earth and receive the worship of all living beings. I grant you permission to exist with the heavens and the Tao. A cold and emotionless voice that was filled with endless majesty came from the mouth of the heavenly Tao Hongjun. It contained endless Tao intent and entered the ears of every living being in the primordial world, living with the heavens and coexisting with the Tao. Speaking of which, any Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal could do that. However, that sentence had a different meaning when it came from the mouth of the heavenly Tao. To Daoyuo Jingxian, the heavens that existed with the heavens referred to the primordial world. The Tao that existed with the Tao referred to the Tao that one had proven. If they died, they could only rely on the Tao that they had proven to slowly accumulate strength and wait for the day of resurrection. However, Feng Zichen had received the promise of the heavenly Tao, so he had a different treatment. To exist with the Tao referred to no longer his own Tao, but the heavenly Tao. If he were to fall, the heavenly Tao would personally resurrect him. With the power of the heavenly Tao, it would be easy to revive a Daoyuo Jingxian. It would take at least 10,000 years or at most a Yuan Hui to make him reappear in the world. That was equivalent to being immortal. It was the treatment of a saint. The great mystical abilities of the primordial world, who had been paying attention to the commotion, could not help but be moved when they saw that scene. That was a treatment that they could not enjoy. It won't be long before the primordial world has another top-notch great mystical ability. A strong thought appeared in the hearts of the great mystical abilities and could not be dismissed. With the care of the heavenly Tao, it was only a matter of time for Feng Zichen to become a great mystical ability. Ever since the Tao ancestor preached the Tao in the Purple Cloud Palace, the great mystical abilities that were born in the primordial world were all disciples of the Tao ancestor. They did not expect that after countless years, the primordial world would welcome a great mystical ability who was not from the Purple Cloud Palace. The primordial world had really changed. For a moment, the great mystical abilities were silent. At the same time, Feng Zichen's appearance gradually appeared in the hearts of all the spirits. Sword Ancestor! Sword Ancestor! Sword Ancestor! In the next moment, almost spontaneously, every creature could not help but shout the two words, Sword Ancestor. Their voices were loud and in unison, and they carried endless power of will as they poured it into Feng Zichen's body. The human Tao was all spirits. The power of all spirits was the power of the human Tao. Chapter 228. As the power of humanity entered his body, Feng Zichen's body underwent a miraculous change. His essence, energy, and spirit were constantly jumping, entangling with the power of humanity that surged into his body, deducing all kinds of mysteries. Among them, Feng Zichen's essence was the most active, and its connection with the power of humanity was the closest, gradually merging with it. Then, his essence completely merged with the power of humanity that surged over, becoming incomparably powerful and magical. The mighty power of humanity flowed, emitting a perfect aura. In the end, this essence suddenly jumped out of his body and hung above his head, giving birth to a flower. That flower was a Tao flower. It seemed to be colorless, but also seemed to have countless colors. The flower bloomed 12th grade, and the innate Tao runes around it were as deep as the sea. The light of humanity flickered, sparkling. This was the flower of essence, the flower of man. Daluo Jingxian's cultivation was the great Tao, and what he cultivated was essence, energy, and spirit. Only when the essence, energy, and spirit were completely perfected, connecting the three talents of heaven, earth, and man, and blooming the three flowers could one operate the rules of heaven and earth, break free from the shackles of the long river of time and space, and become a sage to be. The blooming of the flower of man indicated that Feng Zichen's essence was completely perfected, and it also indicated that he had officially entered the middle stage of Daluo Jingxian. A vast aura rose from his body and swept in all directions. Compared to before, it was more than several times stronger, even surpassing some experts in the late stage of Daluo Jingxian. The 12th grade of the flower was already the peak of the primitive world. There was no way to improve, and he had the potential of a saint. However, although this flower was extraordinary, there were many who could bloom 12th grade in the primitive world. Apart from the saints, there were at least dozens of people among the 3,000 mortal guests of the Purple Cloud Palace who could do this. Feng Zichen was an authentic Pangu, so it was normal for his flower to bloom 12th grade. However, Feng Zichen's flower of man was different from others. It was the true flower of humanity, containing the mighty power of humanity. Although it was also at the 12th stage of the flower blossom realm, it was connected to the human Tao and not the Tao of three talents. Naturally, it was much stronger than others. It was precisely because of this that Feng Zichen was able to possess power that far exceeded his realm. Before this, Nuwa was the only one in the untainted land who could bear the flower of human Tao. The rest could only bear the ordinary flower of human Tao. Of course, when Nuwa was still in the Daluo Jingxian realm, the Tao flower she bore was also an ordinary human flower. The change happened when he created the human race. The birth of the human race, apart from the Xiantian lifeforms, created the postnatal lifeforms, recreated the Xianxia of creation, and filled the void of humanity. Naturally, the mighty power of the human Tao would descend and help Nuwa reconstruct her Tao foundation. The flower of human transformation would then become the flower of human Tao. In the realm of Daluo Jingxian, he far surpassed the great mystical abilities of the primordial world. Now, Feng Zichen had established the Xiantian Sword Dao and accidentally triggered the resonance of all spirits. As a result, it attracted the mighty power of the human Dao to descend and help him bloom the flower of human Dao. This made him the second existence in the primordial world to bloom such a flower after Nuwa. The flower of human Dao. What a great opportunity! When this flower blooms, it can communicate with the human Dao. Every move will be accompanied by the mighty power of the human Dao. It can also be used to explore the secrets of all spirits and seek the true meaning of the great Dao. It's of great help to improve one's cultivation. It can be said that there are many benefits. This fellow Daoist opportunity is really enviable. At this time, the great mystical abilities who could remain calm earlier could no longer remain calm. They all looked at Feng Zichen with some envy. One had to know that the human Dao was all living beings in the primordial world. Its power could restrain all living beings and destroy all magic power. More importantly, the power of the human Dao had the ability to create things out of thin air. The so-called unforgettable memory would definitely have an echo. It was the embodiment of the mighty power of the human Dao. The essence of the incense divine path that Feng Zichen created was a use of the power of the human Dao. Wasn't the power of the will of all spirits the same as the power of the human Dao? Rumble. After Feng Zichen advanced, the heavenly Dao Hongjun made a move. He raised his hand and pointed at Feng Zichen. A purple brilliance surged, attracting all the great Dao in the world and entering his glabella. That purple brilliance was not the purple qi of Hong Meng, but the origin of the heavenly Dao. It was the source of all the great Dao. It was the essence of the primordial world and the strongest power. The sound of a flower blooming could be heard. It was the sound of Feng Zichen's flower of God, the flower of heaven blooming. With the help of the heavenly Dao's origin, Feng Zichen's qi of God reached perfection and formed a flower of Dao. The flower of Dao bloomed 12 times. The flower of heaven was surrounded by the power of the heavenly Dao. It was lofty and vast, merging with the sky. It was ethereal as if it could not be touched. This was the flower of heavenly Dao, a flower of Dao that was connected to the heavenly Dao. It was far from comparable to the flower of heaven that was connected to the Dao of 3 talents. In the primordial world, only the Dao ancestor Hongjun had formed this flower. In the past, the Dao ancestor merged with the Dao and mended the heavenly Dao, perfecting it. Therefore, the power of the heavenly Dao entered his body and mended his Dao foundation. The flower of heavenly Dao bloomed. Feng Zichen absorbed the heavenly Dao's origin and perfected his qi of God. He also bloomed the flower of heavenly Dao. His cultivation improved further and reached the late Daluo Jingxian. His strength was close to the perfected Daluo Jingxian. In this way, Feng Zichen had already bloomed 2 of the 3 flowers. They were the flower of human Dao and the flower of heavenly Dao. He could be said to be the only one in the primordial world, far surpassing the other Daluo Jingxian. When he broke through to the perfected Daluo Jingxian, with the power of the human Dao and the heavenly Dao, no one in the primordial world would be able to compete with him. He could be said to be the first Daluo Jingxian. What? The flower of heavenly Dao? He has already gathered 2 of the 3 Daos of heaven, earth, and man. If he blooms another flower of Dao, I'm afraid he will directly become the great Taoist priests. I didn't expect that creating the Khanate Dao in the primordial world would have such benefits. Maybe we can try and see if we can use this to bloom the flower of heavenly Dao and the flower of human Dao. Seeing this scene, many powerful divines couldn't help but be tempted. They wanted to imitate Feng Zichen's action and create another Khanate Dao for the primordial world. It had been said in the primordial world that the 3 Daos of heaven, earth, and man were the combination of the essence, qi, and spirit of the great Taoist priests Pangu and the will of the primordial world. If someone could bloom the flower of human Dao, the flower of Dao, and the flower of heavenly Dao in succession when he was in the Daluo Jingxian, he would be invincible in the Daluo Jingxian realm and be called the great Taoist priests. The great Taoist priests was the title of Pangu. If the descendants inherited this title, the benefits would be beyond everyone's imagination. Even if they couldn't become a sage, it wouldn't be difficult to set foot in the primordial world of Daluo Jingxian realm. With such a reason, how could those powerful divines not be excited? Their strength was much higher than that of Feng Zichen. It wouldn't be difficult for them to break through the heavenly tribulation. With this thought in mind, the thought of trying in their hearts became even stronger. Chapter 229. In an instant, a brilliant golden light appeared from the void in the vast universe and filled the sky above the wilderness. That was the golden light of merit. At this moment, the golden light of merit descended. Boom! The sky shook, and the boundless golden light of merit suddenly scattered, turning into billions of strands that fell towards the great desolate land. Among them, the largest ball of golden light, which was as much as 30% of the entire merit, flew toward the North Sea and fell into Feng Zichen's body. However, Feng Zichen already had enough merit. Even his merit spiritual light had already reached the peak of an acquired supreme treasure and could no longer advance. No matter how much merit he had, it could not advance further and become an innate spiritual treasure. Sage to be. With the merit in his body, Feng Zichen had an epiphany. As long as he absorbed the merit, he could directly enter the sage-to-be realm and become a powerful great divine ability without any future troubles. However, I walk the path of proving my Dao with strength and become the Pangu Dao body. Although it's a shortcut to become a sage-to-be with merit, it's not good for my Dao. Therefore, I won't take it. To prove one's Dao with strength, one had to press forward and advance bravely. Once one chose a shortcut, it would be like walking on the wrong path. It would affect one's belief in invincibility and gradually deviate from the right path. There were thousands of ways to prove one's Dao in the world, but the weakest was to prove one's Dao with merit and the strongest was to prove one's Dao with strength. Therefore, Feng Zichen already had an answer in his heart about how to choose. Moreover, Feng Zichen also had a vague ambition. He wanted to bloom the flower of earth. Soon, Hoodoo would open up the reincarnation cycle. At that time, the earth would descend, and he could take this opportunity to use the power of the earth to form the flower of earth. If he became a sage-to-be now, the flower of earth would only be the flower of earth, which was far from the flower of earth. Moreover, it would be a blessing to use the power of the earth to form the flower of earth. He also dreamed of using the earth to repair his Dao foundation and forcefully form the flower of earth like Hoodoo. However, it was absolutely impossible. Having made his decision, Feng Zichen immediately took action. The merit that surged into his body gushed out of his body again. It floated behind his head, forming a golden auspicious cloud. It had a radius of 100 million miles, and golden light shone brilliantly, illuminating the surroundings. It was incomparably holy, and ghosts and gods avoided it. On the other side, 3 balls of golden light landed and flew towards Kunlun Mountain, the Heavenly Courts, and the Blood Sea. Each of them had 1 level of Sword Dao merit. After that, 2 more layers of merit spread out and entered the bodies of the 13 demi-saints. The last 2 layers of swordsmanship merit were completely shattered and fell to various places in the untainted land. They were divided equally among the Daluo Jingxian. With that, the Sword Dao merit distribution was completed. When the Khanate sword principle completely merged with the origin of heaven and earth, all the sword-type Dharma treasures in the untainted land sensed it. Dao patterns appeared on their bodies, and their power increased by 30%. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. In the next moment, all the innate divine swords in the primordial world rose into the sky and floated in the air, trembling continuously to express their excitement. There was finally Sword Dao in the untainted land. Even the 4 immortal slaying swords, the Sun God sword, and the Yuantu Avicii twin swords were no exception. Rumble. At the same time, the entire untainted land was shaking. The great Dao rumbled continuously, and the rules trembled together. The Khanate Chi skyrocketed, and the void became more stable. This was the origin of heaven and earth becoming denser. It reflected on the entire untainted land, making the world stronger. Moreover, this change could not be completed in a short period of time. It was believed that in the next tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, the cultivation environment in the untainted land would become better and better. This was the merit of Feng Zichen and the countless sword cultivators in the untainted land. As expected, during this period of time, their luck would rise all the way. They would act as if the heavens were helping them, and their cultivation would improve by leaps and bounds. After the appearance of the 10,000 swords, Heavenly Dao Hongjun opened his hand and suddenly grabbed at the void. At this moment, the world became still and completely lost its sound. After a while, the world returned to normal, and a scroll appeared in Heavenly Dao Hongjun's hand, emitting supreme sword intent. When the Khanate sword Dao was just born, there was no item to suppress luck. I'll give you this sword diagram to suppress the luck of the sword Dao. Heavenly Dao Hongjun said as he threw the sword diagram in his hand to Feng Zichen. Swords were murderous weapons. However, no matter how extraordinary a weapon was, it could not suppress one's luck or absorb merit. It was a weapon that was a Khanate spirit treasure or Khanate supreme treasure. Otherwise, Feng Zichen would integrate the merit of the sword Dao into Zichen's sword to improve its grade. The 10,000 sword diagram was a supreme grade Khanate spirit treasure. It had 45 Khanate divine restrictions that could suppress luck. It was second only to Khanate cardinal treasures. This diagram could also be called the Untainted Land Sword Record. It recorded all the famous swords, sword intents, and even all the experts of the sword Dao in the Untainted Land. In the future, if someone achieved the Heaven Immortal realm with the Khanate sword Dao, or if a peerless sword was born, or if a supreme sword intent was born, they would automatically appear in the 10,000 sword diagram. Only Feng Zichen could see them. Moreover, there were countless sword intents in the 10,000 sword diagram, which contained the insights of countless sword cultivators. With this diagram in hand, it would be difficult for one's sword Dao cultivation to not improve. Of course, the sword Dao was famous for its strong offensive power. As a sword Dao treasure, the 10,000 sword diagram's function was not as simple as auxiliary. It was also an offensive treasure. With a shake of the sword diagram, hundreds of millions of sword chi were released, sweeping through the untainted land, shattering the universe and shaking the universe. It was extremely powerful. Thank you, Heavenly Dao. After putting away the sword diagram, Feng Zichen bowed to Heavenly Dao and said, Thou hast made great contributions to the untainted land. In the future, thou shalt have the supreme Dao. Nodding to Feng Zichen, Heavenly Dao Hongjun promised him. Then, Heavenly Dao Hongjun's figure slowly disappeared and returned to the Heavenly Dao space. Farewell, Heavenly Dao. Hearing this, Feng Zichen could not help but be overjoyed. In the future, if one died, there would be no future. Since the Heavenly Dao had promised to give him the Supreme Dao in the future, it meant that he would not be in danger of dying before he obtained the Supreme Dao. This was better than any benefit. With the disappearance of Heavenly Dao Hongjun, the North Sea gradually regained its calmness. It was as white as snow. Only Feng Zichen stood above the void. He was wearing a feather robe and a star crown. He looked handsome, and his feather robe fluttered in the breeze. He looked refined. His figure was as tall as heaven and earth. He was simple and unadorned, and he was like a peerless divine sword. He showed his sharpness, and his aura pierced through the 9 layers of clouds. He was extremely extraordinary. At this moment, Feng Zichen attracted the attention of the entire untainted land. His body seemed to be covered with a layer of colorful clouds. There were all kinds of innate divine light flowing, making him look endless and majestic. He was the sword ancestor of the untainted land, the authentic Pangu. He was the only one in the untainted land who could bloom the flower of Heavenly Dao and the flower of earth. At this moment, Feng Zichen was extremely brilliant. Even the glory of the saint was overshadowed by him. Chapter 230. Raising his head to look at the sky, Feng Zichen had a feeling. As long as he wanted, he could imprint the path of stars that he had cultivated in the great chaos of the outer realm on the origin of heaven and earth at any time. It would connect with the path of stars of the primordial world and undergo a second enlightenment. The path of stars was within reach for him. However, every time Feng Zichen wanted to put this idea into practice, Lin Mingya's eyes lit up. A great sense of fear would rise in his heart. It was as if there was a certain death crisis waiting for him in the path of stars. Feng Zichen understood that it was Donghuang Tai and Di Jun. Their imprints were in the path of stars. Anyone who wanted to attain the path of stars would be attacked by the Donghuang Bell with all their might. Zhouxing was the foundation of the demon race. Tai and Di Jun would not allow outsiders to touch them. On the Emperor Star, every time Feng Zichen looked at the path of stars, he could see two terrifying figures firmly suppressing the path of stars. If the demon race is not eliminated, I know anyone in the primordial world will never have the chance to attain the path of stars without Di Jun's permission. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation, whether it was from the perspective of his race or his own orthodoxy, the demon race was Feng Zichen's greatest enemy and the biggest obstacle on his path to attaining the path. Fortunately, during the trip to the ultimate, Feng Zichen had obtained a shocking opportunity and was able to attain the path in the great chaos of the outer realm. He had bypassed Tai and Di Jun and cultivated the path of stars, Daluo Jingxian. Otherwise, in the primordial world, he would have either attained other Khanate paths or been killed by the Donghuang Bell when he attained the path of stars. There was no chance of luck. Poor Wei Zenyuanzi, Kunpeng, greets fellow Taoist Zichen. While Feng Zichen was deep in thought, Zenyuanzi and Kunpeng rushed over when they saw the power of the path of heaven dissipate. Zichen greets the two of you. If it was in the past, Feng Zichen wouldn't have dared to address these two as fellow Taoists. He could only consider himself as a junior. But now, it was different. Not to mention his identity as the authentic Pangu, just his identity as the ancestor of the Sword Dao was not something that he could easily lower his head to. If Feng Zichen were to bow down to someone, wouldn't that mean that his innate Sword Dao was inferior to his opponent? Therefore, unless it was someone who was absolutely close to him, even if it was a saint, he could still call them fellow Taoist. Fellow Taoist, in the primordial world, you created something out of nothing and created the Khanate Sword Dao. It benefited all living beings and strengthened the essence of the world. There will be immeasurable merit. His ability far surpasses mine. This poor Wei truly admires him. Zenyuanzi bowed to Feng Zichen and praised. Fellow Taoist, you flatter me. Compared to you, what Zichen has done is nothing. Fellow Taoist, you lived alone at the junction of the East and the West and blocked the barren aura of the West with your own strength. You made it impossible for the East to get close to the East, so that the East would not follow in the footsteps of the West and create the prosperity of the East today. This is a move that benefits all living beings in the primordial world. Only in this way can it be called a great merit. If it weren't for you, how could Zichen be as powerful as he is today? Shaking his head with a smile, Feng Zichen said. Feng Zichen was still very respectful to Zenyuanzi. After all living beings in the East were born with his protection. Fellow Taoist, you are a little modest. There are many experts who use swords in the primordial world. Fellow Taoists Xianxia, Di Jun, and Mingyi are the best among them. They have been cultivating for countless years, but they never thought that you could think of and do what we can't do by establishing a Khanate Dao with the sword in your hand. Just based on this point, you are far better than us. Without waiting for Zenyuanzi to reply, Kunpeng said from the side. Fellow Taoist Kunpeng created the demon language, recorded the history of the demon race, and passed down the order of the demon race. It made the inheritance of the demon race orderly, had a history to follow, and continued to grow. Zichen is also very impressed. Feng Zichen replied after bowing to Kunpeng. No matter what the character of Patriarch Kunpeng was, his wisdom was indeed admirable. Before him, there were only Khanate divine runes in the primordial world. There were no other words. It was he, Kunpeng, who created the demon language in the Demon Master Hall. This was the first language born in the primordial world. It shocked the world and made ghosts and gods cry. That was how Kunpeng's position as the demon master came from. Moreover, the later shaman language, as well as the Dao language created by Feng Zichen, and the various words of the later generations were all inspired and created by Kunpeng. His act of creating the demon language had a far-reaching impact, and others could not help but admire him. Just like that, the three of them flattered each other for a while. In these days, who could stand out from a group of Khanate god-fiends and become the top great divine ability of the primordial world? Which one of them did not do things of great merit that affected the primordial world for countless years? Otherwise, with so many Khanate god-fiends and everyone's aptitude was about the same, why could they stand at the peak of the primordial world while others could not? It could be said that there was no great merit to accompany you, unless you could prove your Dao with strength. Otherwise, no matter how hard you worked, no matter how amazing you were, Daoyuo Jingxian would be your limit. There was no possibility of you becoming a sage to be, because the heavenly Dao did not allow it. This was also the reason why the sage to be disappeared in the later generations, and Daoyuo Jingxian was the peak. Things of great merit had long been done by people in the primordial age, the ancient age, countless years ago. The later generations no longer had any merit to do, so they naturally could not become sage to be. In the long run, the sage to be did not appear in the world for a long time. Wouldn't the primordial world be Daoyuo Jingxian's world? Fellow Taoist, it's a pity for you to stay at the East Sea with your status. Why don't you join the heavenly court and build a great cause so that you can live up to your abilities? When you created the Khanate sword Dao, His Majesty also helped you. I think His Majesty will be very happy for you to join. Now, there are still a few lords of the 9 heavens. If you go to the heavenly court, you will have a bright future. After a while, Taoist Kunpeng suddenly suggested to Feng Zichen. His words were full of temptation, as if he could get the position of Lord of the Heavens if he went to the heavenly court. However, Feng Zichen could not wait to hide from Donghuang Tai and Di Jun. Why would he take the initiative to go to the heavenly court and wander around under their eyes? Just as he was about to refuse, Feng Zichen heard Zenyuanzi beside him persuade him. Fellow Taoist, you must not. The heavenly court is a place where karma is entangled. How can it be a place where cultivators of our generation live for a long time? You are the orthodox Pangu, the primordial sword ancestor. It is easy for you to achieve the great Tao. Why do you have to go to a quagmire like the heavenly court and get dirty? As he spoke, Zenyuanzi turned his head and shouted at Kunpeng. Kunpeng scoundrel, what are your intentions for dragging fellow Taoist Zichen into the heavenly court? The heavenly court was where the world operated. Naturally, it had endless creation. It was the easiest to obtain merit from this place. However, because of the importance of the heavenly court, there was also endless karma gathered here. If one was not careful, they would be entangled with karma and be doomed eternally. That was also the reason why there were countless great mystical abilities in the primordial world, but few people joined the heavenly court. He was really afraid. Before he could get any benefits, he would be tainted with karma, causing his cultivation to be unable to improve. When the Great Tribulation broke out, he would die. Hundreds of millions of years of cultivation would turn into flowing water. Only those Zenith Heaven Golden Immortals who could not gather enough merit to become sage to be would join the celestial court when they had no other choice and slowly accumulate merit. At that moment, Feng Zichen did not lack merit and luck. He was only short of time to become a great mystical ability. Chapter 231. If he were to join the heavenly court now, it would be the greatest disadvantage for Feng Zichen. Kunpeng invited him to join the heavenly court. Regardless of whether his intention was good or bad, the future caused by it was bound to be bad. As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. Zenyuanzi's character was not bad since he could become good friends with Taoist Red Cloud, who was known as a good man. However, compared to Taoist Red Cloud, he knew when to advance and when to retreat. Therefore, Zhenyuanzi, who had such a character, was afraid that Feng Zichen would be deceived by Kunpeng after hearing Taoist Kunpeng's words. Zhenyuanzi, you've gone too far. The heavenly court is not something you can talk nonsense about. As one of the leaders of the heavenly court, Zhenyuanzi spoke ill of the heavenly court in front of him. If Kunpeng did not say anything, people would look down on the heavenly court when this matter spread. Immediately, Kunpeng was angry and said to Zhenyuanzi angrily, Zhenyuanzi, you came to the North Sea to cause trouble for no reason. The Poor Way respects you as the ancestor of the Earth Immortals and has made great contributions to the East, so he tolerates you. I didn't expect that not only do you not know how to restrain yourself, but you also dare to slander the heavenly court in front of the Poor Way. Do you really think I'm afraid of you? You have to know. This is the North Underworld, the Demon Master Palace, and not the fifth manor of Longevity Mountain. As he spoke, a palace surrounded by great Dao slowly appeared behind Taoist Kunpeng. There was a strong demon aura permeating the air and enveloping the entire North Sea. This was the Demon Master Palace, the place where Kunpeng created the demon runes. It contained the merit of educating the demon clan and was one of the treasures of the demon clan. The supreme grade Khanate merit spiritual treasure could activate the demon clan's power of destiny, and its power was shocking. Everyone in the untainted land knows about the heavenly court. There is no need for the Poor Way to slander it. Zhenyuanzi first smiled contemptuously, then his face suddenly turned cold and said to Kunpeng, Cause trouble for no reason? Fellow Taoist, you have a good memory. You forget about my friend Red Cloud. However, even if you can forget, the Poor Way can't. Not to mention that this is the North Sea, even if this is the heavenly court, the Poor Way will still barge in and make you pay the price you deserve to comfort my friend's soul in heaven. A yellow book flew out of Zhenyuanzi's hand and turned into a boundless continent, floating under his feet. Instantly, turbid air gushed out from the ground. It was incomparably thick and heavy, causing the surrounding space to sink by 30%. This was the Earth Book, formed from the membrane of the Great Earth. It contained the power of the Great Earth Source, recording the changes of the Great Earth. It was a natural Great Wasteland map, just like the He-Tu and Luo Shu, possessing the support of unmatched luck. With one strike, it was as if the great desolate land had crashed down. It was incomparably terrifying. It was a top-grade innate spiritual treasure, one of the 3 books of heaven, earth, and man. The 2 of them had been fighting in the North Sea for tens of thousands of years. It was only because Feng Zichen's appearance that the world changed, that the 2 of them stopped temporarily. Now, because of the quarrel, their killing intent had been aroused once more, and the anger they'd accumulated earlier had erupted, and they were about to make a move. Fellow Taoists, you can't. What kind of strength do you have? If you fight, it won't be an exaggeration to say that the world will be destroyed. Who knows how many creatures will be affected and lose their lives because of it? They are so innocent. If they suffer such a calamity for nothing, wouldn't it be the fault of the 2 of you? I hope that the 2 of you can be merciful and stop for the time being. At that time, the creatures of the North Sea will definitely be grateful to the 2 of you. Seeing that the situation was at loggerheads, Feng Zichen hurriedly stepped forward to persuade them. Not to mention that there were countless creatures in the North Sea, and many people would die because of the battle between the 2 of them. Feng Zichen was in the middle of the 2 of them. If they fought, with his Dao Yuo Jinxian's cultivation, it would be completely insufficient. If he was careless, he would be in danger of dying. As such, Feng Zichen didn't dare to let them fight. At the very least, they couldn't fight in the North Sea. At the same time, he was cursing in his heart. If the 2 of you really want to fight to the death, the chaos outside the sky is boundless. No matter how fierce the fight there is, no one will care. What's going on in the North Sea? Feng Zichen's words were reasonable, but the 2 of them were furious and didn't listen at all. They each rode their Dharma treasures and were about to attack each other. Rumble! Just as the 2 supreme-grade Khanate spirit treasures were about to collide, a divine light suddenly descended from the 9 heavens. It was majestic and vast. Although it was called divine light, it was actually more like a boundless galaxy. It hung down and drowned Zenyuanzi and Kunpeng, forcibly separating them. Then, in the roar of the great Tao, a brilliant figure walked out of the void and descended into the world. It was Saint Nua. Fellow Taoists, please stop. You are all the few great divine powers in the primordial world, people who exist with the Tao. How can you not know that the heavens have the virtue of cherishing life and humans have compassion? Why do you have to fight here and implicate hundreds of millions of creatures and commit endless sins? Even if you are not afraid of karma, you should think about your disciples. Fellow Taoists, they became your disciples in pursuit of the great Tao, in order to transcend fate. When the time comes, don't let the karma affect your disciples, causing them to be unable to improve their cultivation. Then they will become a joke in the primordial world. After Nuwa appeared, she first withdrew the divine powers that shrouded the two of them. Then she bowed and persuaded them slowly. You're right, fellow Taoist Nuwa. We were too reckless. After being forcibly separated, Zenyuanzi and Kunpeng also calmed down. They tidied their robes and bowed to Nuwa, saying in unison, I didn't expect that poor Wei's momentary mistake would lead to such a big mistake and implicate countless creatures in the North Sea. It's really poor Wei's fault. Looking at the messy North Sea, Zenyuanzi said with some sorrow. Then he picked up the earth book and waved it. Endless turbid earth chi hung down and kept surging above the sea, gradually forming a continent. Poor Wei has nothing. The only thing I can do for the creatures in the North Sea is to open up a blessed land for them to live and reproduce. This blessed land was opened by the earth book. Its origin is rich and is not weaker than ordinary blessed lands in the primordial world. Let it be the poor Wei's compensation. Zenyuanzi pointed at the continent and said, the earth book was connected to the origin of the primordial world. The blessed land opened by it contained a trace of the origin power of the earth. It was very magical and endless. It could constantly absorb the chi of the earth vein to grow. Only the origin power of the earth could resist the invasion of the connate coldness of the North Sea. Otherwise, with Kunpeng's means, it would have opened up many blessed lands in the North Sea. It would not have made the current North Sea a glacier without any traces of people. It was because the connate coldness was too strong. No matter how many blessed lands there were in the North Sea, they could not resist its invasion and gradually turned into wastelands and glaciers. Seeing this, Kunpeng snorted coldly but did not say anything. He was the actual master of the North Sea. He benefited the most from Zenyuanzi's actions. What else could he say? Feng Zichen, who was at the side, was secretly shocked when he saw this scene. In the end, it was because of the difference in strength. The same words, when spoken by people of different strengths, would result in different results. Zenyuanzi and Kunpeng did not even listen to Feng Zichen's words. As soon as Nuwa said that, they immediately stopped and looked regretful. They immediately made up for it. The two of them stopped, and the haze that shrouded the hearts of countless creatures in the North Sea instantly dissipated, allowing them to relax. Then, they saw a piece of land appear out of thin air above the North Sea. The connate chi inside was like clouds and mist, surrounded by the chi of creation. It was extraordinary. Under the display of the heavenly secrets, they immediately understood that the ancestors of the earth immortals could not bear to see the bitter cold of the North Sea and the suffering of hundreds of millions of creatures. They deliberately used their great mystical abilities to open up a connate blessed land for them to live and reproduce. After all, they were the incarnations of the great Tao, the connate god fiends born by heaven and earth, the children of the world, and the top great mystical abilities of the primordial world. The heavenly Tao had to take care of their dignity and voluntarily concealed the truth of the matter. It beautified the disaster that they had caused because of their personal grudges and turned it into a move that benefited the living beings of the North Sea. It did not mention a word about the slaughter caused by their previous battle. However, the heavenly Tao was fair in the end. Although it did not say it, it would still secretly record it and wait to settle it in the future. To the heavenly Tao, merit was merit, and mistakes were mistakes. It could only weaken the calamity with merit, but it could not offset each other. Otherwise, Why would there be such a move of first punishing and then rewarding? Couldn't they just offset each other? Ancestor of the 5 cardinal points is merciful. We will never forget today's kindness. For a moment, the living beings of the North Sea knelt down and kowtowed to the ancestor of the 5 cardinal points. Clearly, they had long forgotten who had caused the calamity of the North Sea. That's right. The moment the heavenly secrets appeared, an invisible force descended and distorted all the karma in this place. It made everything look like what the heavenly secrets showed. That was the sorrow of low-level cultivators. Their realms were not as good as Daluo Jinxian's. They could not even detect that their memories had been silently tampered with. In the dark, Feng Zichen secretly glanced at Zenyuanzi and realized that his expression was normal. He did not look embarrassed at all. Obviously, it was not the first time he had experienced such a thing. No wonder. In the legends of the later generations, as long as they are still alive, they are all incomparably grand and righteous. Any one of his deeds will make the future generations feel deeply moved. It turns out that the dark history of them has been covered up by the heavenly Tao, causing the future generations to not be able to see and pursue it. That makes them look like the incarnation of justice. Only those mighty figures who died in the long river of time were abandoned by the heavenly Tao. Only then did the deeds of harming the primordial world spread out and be known by the future generations. The legends of the later generations cannot be trusted. At that moment, Feng Zichen seemed to have figured something out. Not all the dead mighty figures were bad. Only the dead mighty figures who had lost the cover of the heavenly Tao would become bad. The living mighty figures had the cover of the heavenly Tao. Of course, they were all good. As for the remaining mighty figures, only the heavens knew what they were like. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.